No, you have to develop your own tone. Have other people tone that you can recognize.
This Honourable House now resumes its sitting. Call of the roll.
Mrs. Holness, Mr. Bartlett, Mr. Holness, Dr. Clark, Dr. Chang, Mr. Montague, Mr. Shaw, Mr. Samuda, Ms. Grange, Mrs. Williams, Mrs. Malawu Fort, Dr. Tufton, Mr. McKenzie, Mr. Chuck, Mr. Vaz, Mr. Warmington, Mr. Hutchinson, Mr. Charles, Mr. Chuck, Mrs. Malawu Fort, Mr. Charles, Mr. Montague, Mr. Terry Long, Miss Smith, Mr. Main, Dr. Dunn, Mrs. Cuthbert Flynn, Mr. Morgan, Mr. Davis, Mr. Brown, Dr. Brown Burke, Dr. Charles, Mr. Chin, Mr. Clark, Mr. Cousins, Ms. Crawford, Miss Daly, Miss Davis, Mr. Golding, Mr. Graham, Mr. Golding, Mr. Green, Dr. Guy, Mrs. Hamilton, Miss Hannah, Mr. Henry Kitts, Mr. Henry, Miss Daly, Mr. Hilton, Mr. Jackson, Mr. Lawrence, Miss Lee, Mr. Lawrence, Mr. Miller, Miss Morrison, Mrs. Nita Garvey, Mr. Paulwell, Mr. Phillips, Dr. Phillips, Mr. Robertson, Mr. Robinson, Mr. Sibbles, Mr. Slowly, Mrs. Vaz, Dr. Wheatley, Mr. Williams, Mr. Wilson, Mr. Witter, Mr. Wright.
By ministers.
Madam Speaker, today we have statements being made by the Honourable Favour Williams, Minister of Education, Youth and Information. Honourable Perennial Charles Jr. will be making two statements. The Honourable Christopher Tufton, Minister of Health, and the Honourable Nigel Clark, Minister of Finance and the Public Service. We, Madam Speaker, will begin with Minister Williams making her statement. Thank you.
Minister Williams, you, before you begin, do you have copies for your, can I have a copy too?
It was handed in. Where is it? It was handed in. Yeah. You gave it to Tashoy. Tashoy. Where's Tashoy? Okay. All right. Yeah. All right. Thank you, Madam Speaker. Since the onset of the COVID-19 pandemic, the Ministry of Education, Youth and Information has been supporting our schools to continue the education of our students despite the challenging circumstances. Madam Speaker, you may recall that approval was granted for a phased resumption of face-to-face learning for the 2021-2022 academic year, which has allowed for all pre-primary, which would be the brain builder centers, basic and infant schools or departments, 376 small primary schools, and grades 11 through 13 students in the secondary schools who are preparing for external exams to resume in-person learning using a whole day or a rotational schedule. In the first week of face-to-face learning, which commenced on November 8, 2021, 248 of the approved 376 primary schools opened for in-person learning, and these schools reported an average attendance of some 33,158 students of approximately 50,000 students enrolled, or 66% for the week ended November 12, 2021. In the second week, which ended on November 19, 2021, 410 schools opened for face-to-face, but that number includes some of our standalone infant schools. And our principals reported an average attendance of some 40,147 students, or approximately 80% reporting for in-person learning. Since the reopening, there have been 5 reported cases of infection, COVID infection among students, as well as 2 suspected cases amongst teachers, and these were all managed within the COVID-19 protocols. I turn now, Madam Speaker, to our large primary schools. In continuation of our phased reopening of schools, Cabinet has granted permission for our larger primary schools to be opened for face-to-face. A total of 383 primary schools are approved for the next phase of face-to-face learning. As I said, these schools are our larger primary schools, some with their enrollment above 630, while others are occupying 80% or more of their capacity and will account for some 164,000 students. These larger primary schools must use the blended approach, which is the online and the face-to-face. They must use a rotational schedule given their capacity and enrollment, meaning some students will be in the face-to-face environment on one day, let's say Monday, while others are at home, and then those who are at home would rotate and come into the face-to-face environment. In any 1 week, students must be at school for at least 2 days out of the week. These schools must also be inspected and approved as COVID-19 compliant by the Ministry of Health and Wellness. And I know many are already. This is just a reminder for those who are not inspected. Additionally, Madam Speaker, despite our schools not being open, the Ministry of Health and Wellness still requires an inspection in order for them to be open. And so it has been doing the rounds at our schools, and as I said, many of them are already inspected. For all those persons who are working in the school environment, we are expecting that you will be vaccinated given the availability of the COVID vaccines and the special arrangements that have been made to accommodate our school staff. Those who work in the school environment as well are expected to be present for work once the students are scheduled to be at school. Persons with comorbidities are encouraged to get vaccinated and observe the COVID protocols once on the job. Everybody should, but this is a particular awareness that we're trying to generate among those persons with comorbidities. Our schools are required to work with parents to determine the start-up date. This can be a staggered start given the preparation that may be needed at the school level. Madam Speaker, I now turn to our secondary schools. Currently, there are some 206,000 students at the secondary level. Approximately 56,000, or 27% of these students, are currently benefiting from limited face-to-face learning in preparation for external examinations because of the deadlines associated with their activities. Secondary schools reaching 65% or more of their student population being fully vaccinated are allowed to be back in the face-to-face environment. The remote learning opportunities or the online opportunities will continue to be available for those who've chosen not to be vaccinated. This includes the online or computer-aided learning, audiovisual learning, and our learning kits. Our secondary schools or students in general have used one or more of these modalities over the last 1.5 years for their education, and so they're quite used to being in the remote or the virtual world. Again, in our secondary schools, you must use a blended approach, a rotational schedule given your capacity and enrollment. You must be inspected and approved as COVID-19 compliant by the Ministry of Health and Wellness, and of course must strictly observe the COVID-19 protocols in the daily operations. Here as well in our secondary schools, all those persons who are working there are expected to be vaccinated given the availability of the COVID vaccines and the special arrangements that have been made to accommodate our school staff. If you work in the school environment, you're expected to be present for work once the students are scheduled to be at school. And again, if you have a comorbidity, you're encouraged to get vaccinated and to observe the COVID protocols once on the job. In our secondary schools, we are also expecting our schools to work with our parents to determine the start-up date. This can be staggered, given the extent of the preparation that would be needed. Several of our high schools have reported that they have attained or are very close to attaining the 65% vaccination rate. And just to give you an example, some of these schools are Ardennes High, St. George's College, York Castle High, Campion College, St. Andrew High School for Girls, Glenmuir, Denby, Knox College, and Kingston College. It must be noted that to date, 124,604 students aged 12 to 18 have received at least one dose of the Pfizer vaccine, which is 60% of the targeted population of 206,635. Of this number, 49,415 students are fully vaccinated, which represents approximately 24% of the targeted population. And we continue to encourage our schools, our students to push for the 65% or better. Madam Speaker, whereas there are no vaccines for children who are under 12 years of age, it is imperative that the mask mandate be established and strictly enforced for all persons who will be in the school setting environment. The Ministry of Education, Youth and Information is in full support of the thrust to vaccinate persons to whom vaccination is available, and as such will continue to actively encourage the parents or guardians of children who attain 12 years of age to get their child or ward vaccinated as a critical layer of protection against serious illness and hospitalization in the event they contract COVID-19. In so doing, school blitz, vaccination blitz, are being held weekly towards full vaccination of the 12 to 18 cohort of students. Several schools have hosted their vaccination blitz, and this resulted in the increased vaccination rate previously mentioned. We have many schools that are scheduled that have been doing the rounds: Manning's High, St. George's College, Kingston College, Mount Alvernia High, Campion, Denham Town High, Titchfield High, Iona, Edward Allen, Glenmuir, York Castle, Bishop Gibson, Bel Air, the Carteret, Ferncourt High, Thompson Town, Kemps Hill, Brownstown, Kingston Technical, St. Andrew Technical, Meadowbrook High, Edith Dalton, Carberry Court, Randolph Lopez Special School, St. Hilda's High, Discovery Bay, Tarrant, Gainsted, Steertown, Arbuthnot, Gallimore. Many schools are having vaccinations that are scheduled. Many have done already, but they are all working towards that 65%. The schools have forms for students to pre-register for their vaccination. The form has a space for parents to give their consent if they cannot accompany their child to the vaccination site. Principals are expected to call the parents and verify and carefully document this on the registration form. The principals can also ask the parents to send verification via WhatsApp or email of their consent and that they would not be able to accompany their child to the vaccination site. This is to ensure that parent and child are in sync and that there are no liability issues. Madam Speaker, while COVID-19 vaccination is not mandatory at this time, it is highly recommended, again, that schools personnel who must interact with students be vaccinated. Madam Speaker,
the Minister's time for speaking has expired.
Madam Speaker, I ask that the Minister be allowed sufficient time to complete her presentation. Thank you.
The question before the House is that the Minister be given sufficient time to complete her presentation. Those in favor? Aye. Those against? The ayes have it. Minister, you may continue.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, while there is no specific requirement at this time for persons such as vendors or traffic wardens to be vaccinated, within the context of the resumption of face-to-face teaching and learning and the fact that those persons either operate at or in close proximity to the schools and as such may come into contact with students, the Ministry strongly recommends and encourages them to get vaccinated. School administrators are expected to be vigilant in this regard. Where possible, Madam Speaker, all our schools are encouraged to utilize the outdoors for classes, ensure appropriate contingencies are in place in the event of adverse weather condition. Face-to-face teaching and learning can continue in a safe and seamless manner. The Ministry will remind and direct the schools to stagger their respective lunch and break periods and have students eating in their classrooms instead of in a cafeteria or a canteen setting. Finally, Madam Speaker, to speak to the issue of public transportation, the Ministry remains cognizant of the critical importance of safe transportation in the thrust to resume face-to-face teaching and learning at our schools. Many students rely on public transportation in commuting to and from school, and as such, it is imperative that students have available to them transportation services that carry them in a safe, reliable, and responsible manner, observing established protocols. The support of the Ministry of Transport and Mining from a monitoring and enforcement standpoint is indispensable. Indeed, the Ministry of Transport and Mining is an imperative partner in seeing to it that children who have to rely on public transportation are carried to and from school in a manner that is safe and responsible. Madam Speaker, Parliament is asked to note that the Ministry has in place a rural transportation program to accommodate close to 7,500 PATH and other needy students from 250 primary and high schools across 13 parishes. This service will be reactivated to support targeted students of schools that will be open face-to-face. The Ministry will also continue to strengthen its partnership with JUTC to accommodate students in Kingston and St. Andrew, St. Catherine, and targeted corridors in St. Thomas and Clarendon. In addition, Madam Speaker, the student passenger rail service is being organized by the Ministry of Transport and Mining in partnership with the Ministry of Education the Railway Corporation of Jamaica, and the JUTC, and will commence operation from Old Harbour and Linstead to Spanish Town once schools are resuming face-to-face teaching and learning. Under the guidance of the Ministry of Transport and Mining, the student passenger rail service will provide transportation service to at least 400 students on a daily basis. The service will observe established infection prevention and control protocols and is expected to have ongoing monitoring and assessment. Madam Speaker, I know over the last year and a half, our students, our teachers, and all those who work in the school environment have had testing time, but I want to commend all of our teachers, all of our students, for the work that they've done to keep education going, to keep our students learning. And yes, I know it hasn't been perfect. And every day we wake up to make it better. And we know that our parents, our students, our teachers, our staff, all the stakeholders in the education sector want to see the students back in the face-to-face environment. We believe the approach that we've taken is one in which we've been able to bring them back safely into that environment, and it's an environment that will be monitored going forward and one that we will ensure abides by the COVID-19 protocols in terms of mask wearing, distancing, hand sanitizing, and so on. So I encourage all Jamaicans to help to support our students wherever they are, wherever you see them. Encourage them, please, to continue to observe the protocols as they make their way to and from school. And in our school environment, we ask of our staff there to continue to do the same. Get vaccinated, and let's get back to life. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, allow me to begin by thanking our principals, teachers, parents, and students for the effort that they have made and the interest they have shown in the importance of education and understanding what is needed to ensure that successive generations are not lost because of this pandemic. Let me also thank the Minister for the update that she has given. I must admit, Minister, that as I read the report, I am moved to say where we are in an age where our decisions are data-driven. And I have seen from how you have approached the report an attempt to provide that data. I'm going to make two suggestions in that regard. One is that bringing it to us in Parliament is important, and we are grateful for that. But I also believe that the data that we're talking about, because it's so important, needs to be very transparent and accessible to individuals or stakeholders. Those would include your principals, your teachers, your parents, and your students, so that we have that data in terms of what we're talking about. So if it doesn't exist in that kind of easily accessible manner, I would want to suggest, Minister, that you do that. We have been moving to have a lot more information on the website, so I'm asking that we take it a step further there. In addition to that, I note from what you're saying that the experience proved what the research has been showing, that there are ways to put our students in school and to minimize the risk of infection and transmission of COVID-19. And so as I look at the report you have given, in relation to the first week of face-to-face learning and the 248 schools of the 376 that actually had in-person learning, and where you say that we had 66% of engagement of students actually attending school, that the numbers in terms of transmission were fairly low and they were treated within the protocols. And I'm pleased to see that, because that's what the data suggests. And the experience in doing this really vindicates the logical, practical decision that you had taken. I know that when we started talking about that, many persons thought that we were irresponsible, but I'm pleased to see where we are. Minister, I also know that for the larger primary schools, you spoke about some of them occupying 80% or more of their capacity. What I am not certain of in terms of the figures quoted is how many students in the larger primary schools are still unaccounted for. Yes, I'd love to know that. And even when we give that average of 66%, it would also be important to take out the outliers and to see, you know, on an average, what is the number of those, how many are really not being engaged. 80%, well, you noted as well, Minister, that 73% of the secondary school cohort are limited to remote learning opportunities, which complicates the efforts to reduce learning loss. We can deduce what the reasons are. I think it will be important to actually itemize or make clear what are the reasons that limit them. And in particular, what is being done by the ministry to ensure that these students that are limited to remote learning opportunities, that we improve their situation and get them to a stage where they can come into the proper teaching learning environment.
Members' time has expired.
A few more minutes.
Please, go ahead.
Thank you very much. You noted, Minister, in terms of the attempts to get to 65% of the student population vaccinated, that currently the vaccinated stands at 24% of the targeted population. And again, it's the same question I ask. Whenever we are not meeting targets, one of the things that we do is to really look at how public education and targeted education and engagement can improve that. And I would love to know exactly what is being done by the ministry, by the schools. I know that earlier there were some lessons or modules that were developed. How is that going? Is it being rolled out? Are they accepting that? Is that making a difference? Even though we have done that, if it's not making a difference, what is the thinking in the ministry and the schools in terms of the suggestions they have given to improve the take-up rate? I note for the public transportation that in terms of rural students, something is being done. I'm very pleased for that, because rural students have really been complaining, and they are probably greater affected because of the distance to travel and several buses and so on. I would love, though, Minister, even for urban areas, for us to look at some of those schools and see how they can be assisted in making sure that it's a little safer. Because remember now, public transportation is a mix of vaccinated and unvaccinated, and so it puts even our vaccinated students at greater risk. And I believe that that is something we should not ignore. And I say that although I'm very mindful, Minister, that there is a language that is being used by the government that has me extremely uncomfortable. And that language tends to You know, I grew up being very proud in the 70s of the elimination of the Bastard Act, so that some children were not one class and second class, and we got rid of that. We seem to be introducing a language that is almost separating our people into the vaccinated and the unvaccinated. And the way in which we approach some of the language that is being used, pretty soon, instead of some of the stigma that we are trying to reduce and the discrimination that we are trying to avoid, we are going to find that amongst our people and our children, that there is that discrimination and stigma between the vaccinated and unvaccinated. And I want to just caution in terms of that. And as I speak, Minister, I speak based on my experience. I speak also based on how I know individuals out there are receiving the message. And I speak, of course, from my own interpretation and how I feel when I hear the language being used by the government. So for those who would want to say that what I say is dangerous, don't have that sort of voucher comment. Put it on record so the people of Jamaica can find out what exactly I'm saying that is dangerous. I want to challenge us to do that. And as I close, I just also want to say I think it is time for us to stop cussing people because they're not taking the vaccine. Stop calling them all kind of things and get to the root of what are for some of them, they are still unclear. We have had unfettered, and it's not Jamaica alone who has had that. Unfettered, we have had a campaign of misinformation and disinformation, especially for individuals who are taking their information from social media and so on. We have not done enough, I believe, to combat that. And as I said, this is not unique to Jamaica. But being conscious of that, I believe that we need to engage now a program that gets them to unlearn and reject some of what they have accepted as being truth and factual. Thank you.
Madam Speaker, let me thank the member for her comments and questions, and just to answer a few of the questions that she has posed. In terms of those students who are not engaged yet with the school system, we are continuing our yard-to-yard initiative, in which we're literally going into homes once we identify that the student hasn't been showing up. And we'll know this more and more as more schools come back into the online mode. So we want to get into the homes to find out what's going on, what's preventing the child from attending school in whatever modality, and to aggregate that data to see what kind of intervention is needed to help our families, to help our students to be back in school. In terms of vaccination, you've asked what's been done. We've done many, many sensitization sessions with teachers, with principals. We've had Ministry of Health and Wellness professionals on the platform to be asked whatever questions people have about the vaccines. And we've seen where that has helped. If you look at the number for the education sector, and I don't remember if I said that, right, and we would have seen that move over time. With regards to the students, I think the pause that we had in not having COVID, the Pfizer vaccines, and it blunted the momentum, but we've been catching up again. We have 200 school nurses that are deployed to help our schools. There's help from the regions, help from central ministry to help our schools to put this on. So it's not a case of you having the schools in Kingston with more versus a school in rural Jamaica. We are making sure that all our schools have access to the vaccines and they have the necessary resource in terms of nurses, doctors who can help there. I think those were your major questions. I appreciate the comment you made about the data. We're trying to implement what's called an EMIS, Education Management Information System, We are well down the wicket in terms of that, and so we'll be able to have data at our fingertips, more accurate data, rather than having to call the regions and them call the principals to get this data. So we're working on that because there's a lot of data to manage, and it will help us in our planning as well. We will be implementing a registration system in our schools so that we know that students show up to school and we know it in a timely way. Right now we have to wait kind of months before we know who went to school last month. So I appreciate that comment and the need for us to really have the kind of systems that will give us the data almost in real time to help us better manage our school system. Thank you very much. Yeah, I just did the yard to yard. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Minister, I'm not too certain if you would be able to tell us the 65% of what is the total amount. Because I heard about the 65% that is now registered to go back to school. I'm not too certain if you have the total amount, the school population that should be really back in school. And I also would like to know, I see where you have 65% again in terms of the vaccine rate in terms of school, but the amount of schools that you put here, I am wondering in terms of what population are we talking about, because we only talk about the 65%, but I believe the nation do not know 65% of what. And I've realized it is deeply concentrated in the Kingston and St. Andrew area. I would like to know what is going to happen, because I'm going to say something here that might not be too comfortable. But those lower schools, high schools, are the ones that have densely populated communities, and they have to go back into these communities, and they can pose serious danger and threat if we are not very mindful that they are not coming forward to take the vaccination. And I would like to find out also, do you have a time limit that you put now to get all schools back to reopen? Because I noticed you said it is constantly going. But do you have a time factor that you could say by February of next year all schools will be open, or you are not certain as yet? And the fourth thing I want to find out is, can you say where the textbook, the program is now in school, because of the textbook, in terms of the tools that the children use to their regular books that they normally offer to the schools. The government would offer those workbooks. I'm not certain if by any means, because of the lockdown, if there was proper provision made to get these textbooks in the hands of these students so that they'll be ready when school reopen.
Thank you, Member. In terms of the 65%, there would be 65% of the particular school population, right? So it's on a school-by-school basis. So if you get to your 65%, you can be back into the face-to-face environment. And I listed the schools that have indicated that they're either at, close to, or above the 65%. And we will be working with the other schools to ensure that they get to that level as well. In terms of your question about when will all schools be open, as of today, essentially, all schools are open, right? With the stipulation that at our secondary schools, they have to get to the 65% or higher to bring students back into the face-to-face environment. In terms of the textbooks and workbooks, yes, those were distributed. Students and parents were required to pick these up at schools at the beginning of the school year. To the extent that there are any at our schools, any textbooks or workbooks there, the parents might not have shown up to pick them up. But what? What? No textbooks?
And they keep changing them.
Okay. All right, we'll do. All right, thank you.
Minister, just a couple of questions. One, are you in a position to indicate with more certainty when the tablets are going to be delivered to the schools? That's first. Yeah, man, the tablets to the 100 tablets that were committed. Second, to constituencies. Secondly, do we have enough vaccines that if all the students want to take up the vaccines, they are sufficient to ensure that they are vaccinated? And then thirdly, have all the principals of schools been communicated to in terms of the requirements once they hit the 65%, in terms of getting the Ministry of Health's clearance, etc., so that they can move to reopening?
In terms of the 100 tablets to MPs, those will be ready. The process will be completed this week, and so by next week you should be getting your information about it. It will be, in order to speed up the delivery of it, believe it or not, we will be giving to you the vouchers, 30,000 vouchers, so you can give to the person to go to the approved vendor and pick up. Not through the school, it'll be through the MPs. Yeah. So you'll interface with the students. Yeah, we're ready with the system. Yeah. Sorry, apologies for the delay, but we're there now. Vaccines, we have enough, and the Minister of Health and Wellness just confirmed that we have enough if all of our secondary school students want to take it up. So we have 206,635 students, and if everybody takes it up, it will be double that number. And the 65%, yes, we've been talking about the 65% for a while now, but we will continue to work with our schools that have indicated that they're there to make sure that they go through the process. And many of them would have gotten inspected already and are doing their vaccination blitz and just ready to go.
Minister, as I listen to the discussion and first of all the presentation and the answers to the discussion, I don't know if I missed something along the way, but we know from the data that you have, your own data that you presented, that there are a number of students, particularly in inner city communities, that have not been participating in the online classes. As you now seek to roll out and to get the schools going and the classes going again, what are the measures and the plans in place to ensure that those who have really just dropped out of the process, that they are now brought back online, and the particular measures in place to address those situations? I'd like to hear, the remedial efforts. I'd like to hear that, because it can't simply be that we just reopen, integrate, and just flow along, because we know that there are some problems.
Okay, thank you, member. So we would have engaged our students in terms of doing an assessment of them, so that we know where they are in terms of their learning, given, as you said, the learning loss. And so those students, once they're in the face-to-face environment again, depending on where they are, they would have some kind of heavy-duty lessons, right? So I think we have 3 different levels that when we assess, we put students in, the ones who are going to need more interaction versus those who are independent and are assessed as being able to carry on versus those in the middle. So that's one initiative, in-class initiative. Outside of class, you probably would have heard me talk about when I did my sectorial, the national homework and the national after-school program. These we will begin to scale up as more and more of our students come back into the face-to-face environment. We'll be using technology to help us to scale it up, but where we can, we'll also use face-to-face. And then our third initiative in the primary schools in particular is the use of specialist teachers in our schools. And we're starting out with about 1/3 of our primary schools having specialist teachers, and we'll continue to scale that up as we move along next year. So we expect that the teaching and learning experience will be better for both students and teachers, because if you have a teacher who loves maths and loves to teach math, you can imagine how that experience is going to be a lot better than for a teacher who doesn't really like to teach math. So that's a change that we've made in our primary schools, 1/3 of them now, and then we'll add more as we go along. So together we believe those 3 or 4 initiatives will help our students to recover what they would have lost, but more important, to move beyond where they were when we started in this COVID-19 pandemic.
Madam Speaker, at this time, the Minister of Finance and the Public Service will make his statement. Thank you.
Minister Clark.
Madam Speaker, last week, Clarendon Alumina Production Limited, otherwise known as CAP, was transferred to the portfolio of the Ministry of Finance and the Public Service. And I was giving this statement as an update. The former board of CAP was dissolved prior to the transfer, and as such, my first duty as minister was to appoint a new board. The immediate strategic challenges facing CAP have guided the selection and appointment of the new board. A little recap is necessary to contextualize the board appointments and, more importantly, to inform the public of the macro criticality of CAP and the strategy going forward. CAP, which is 100% owned by the government of Jamaica, has a 45% interest in the unincorporated Jamaica joint venture with General Alumina Jamaica, which is owned by the Noble Group. Under the unincorporated joint venture arrangements, there's no limited liability company called Jamaica. Instead, CAP and Noble are required to contribute working capital on a monthly basis to acquire the inputs of production and in return receive their proportional share of alumina as output, which they then sell on the world market. This arrangement has existed for over 30 years, with Glencore and Alcoa preceding Noble as the government's partner. Notwithstanding this history, the unincorporated nature of the Jamaica joint venture has outlived its usefulness. In its current form, the arrangements represent an untenable fiscal risk to the government of Jamaica. Due to the fact that there's no balance sheet for Jamaica, the financing of its operations falls squarely on the shoulders of the shareholders, Noble and the government of Jamaica. Jamaica does not have the ability to borrow as a legal entity. Called Jamaica does not exist. As such, in the past, where capital is required to finance Jamaica, the government of Jamaica has borrowed its proportional share. Complicated matters, An indebted and cash-strapped government of Jamaica has, in the past, borrowed against future alumina sales and repatriated the proceeds to the Central Treasury up front, while fixing the price that CAP receives for its alumina over several years. This has been a practice for over 30 years, mostly born of necessity. Invariably, however, and I can speak to the last 15 or 16 years, these arrangements have been very costly over the long term, as market prices of inputs have often moved adversely as compared with the alumina price fixed years prior. To be more specific, one of CAP's central problems has been having a fixed price for alumina set years prior, and having the cost of heavy fuel oil, when it used heavy fuel oil, caustic soda and lime, but particularly HFO, move adversely upwards, creating huge mismatches between costs and revenues and leading to large negative cash flows and losses. As such, CAP has had significant cash flow difficulties over a long period of time and been a fiscal risk to the government of Jamaica, with substantial cash calls from time to time. Over the past 15 years, the government of Jamaica has financed CAP in the form of an assumption of CAP debt in around 2013-14, or in the form of loans from the central government to CAP, or in the form of other financial resources provided to CAP. All told, the government of Jamaica has provided financing to CAP of over $800 million over the past 16 years. Over these 16 years, and CAP's financial year is similar to the government of Jamaica, as it begins on April 1st and it ends on March 30th. Over these 16 years, CAP has made a profit only once. Let me say it again. Over the last 16 years, CAP has made a profit only once, in 2016-17, with losses in 15 of the last 16 years. The total aggregated loss over the last 16 years exceeds $700 million. For long stretches of time, CAP depended on its partner Noble to finance working capital obligations on its behalf, and therefore built up large working capital liabilities to Noble. The structural and legal arrangements that gave rise to these predicaments can no longer be justified. CAP has competed with health, education, and security for scarce taxpayer dollars, and has been a fiscal risk to the government of Jamaica for a very long time. In fact, in the 2010 IMF agreement, divestment of CAP was a strategic priority which occupied the attention of the then administration. This could not be achieved at any sensible price due to, among other things, the unincorporated structure through which the government holds its Jamaica investment. As such, the government has been working, certainly over the past 4 years, towards incorporating Jamaica and having all the vast array of assets, factory, land, buildings, equipment, and liabilities required for operations fully vested in a new limited liability version of Jamaica. It has been a major priority of the Ministry of Finance to eliminate the fiscal risk posed by CAP and to eliminate the historical financial hemorrhaging caused by CAP. As has been disclosed in this House before, the Ministry of Finance and the Public Service has therefore provided strategic and financial leadership to the incorporation process, which is now far advanced. As an intermediate step, the Ministry of Finance and the Public Service has provided financial resources that have allowed for a restructuring and re-engineering of CAP's balance sheet. Last year, August 2020, I announced in this House a major breakthrough on the path to incorporation when the Ministry of Finance and the Public Service loaned CAP $137 million to repay its interest-bearing obligations to Noble. That loan was at 8%, whereas the government of Jamaica was borrowing at 5%. So it made these are approximate numbers. It made no sense to keep that liability outstanding. This allowed CAP to terminate the alumina sales agreement, which still had 5 years remaining. And remember, under the alumina sales agreement, CAP was committed to sell alumina at fixed prices agreed years prior, which were then below the market price, and in some months, well, which were now below the market price, and in some months below the cost of production. The alumina sales agreement was replaced by a marketing agreement where CAP received the same market price for its alumina as Noble, less a fixed commission of 2%. This put CAP in a vastly improved position with respect to its revenues. Madam Speaker, this was a major breakthrough which has, since that time, allowed CAP to enjoy higher prices for alumina and a lower cost of interest on its debt. Instead of paying Noble 8% on its debt, it pays the Ministry of Finance 4%. This is on US dollars debt, a savings of approximately $6 million a year to CAP. Combined, these re-engineering steps, the refinancing of the debt and the termination of that alumina sales agreement and the replacement with a marketing agreement, have allowed CAP to enjoy profitability thus far this year, since April 1st, 2021, for the first time in 6 years, and the second time in 16 years, which makes recent developments so unfortunate. And the House should recognize that for the 6 months between April and September represent the only the second time in 16 years that CAP had profitability and that it had cash flow positive because of the restructuring, getting rid of that alumina sales agreement where we were selling underwater. But we could only get rid of that alumina sales agreement when we paid off the debt, when the government was in a position to pay off the debt. So it's important that the House recognize that, Madam Speaker. Importantly, not only profitability, CAP has been able to make its working capital calls this year from its internally generated resources rather than borrowing from Noble. And this too is a major change. Now, in addition to that $137 million that was owed, and it's an interest-bearing liability, CAP also owed Noble working capital, because what happened was that when the working capital calls came, because what it got for its alumina was lower than the cost of production, and it couldn't put the money up, CAP had to borrow from Noble. So Noble put the money up on its behalf, and that balance reached $60 million. So this year in 2021, and you'll see it in the budget documents that were tabled in April, and we spoke about it in Standing Finance Committee, the Ministry of Finance and the Public Service lent CAP a further $60 million to repay Noble the non-interest-bearing working capital loan accumulated from CAP's inability to finance its share of the working capital requirements. So today, CAP does not, or certainly before the fire, let's to be safe say that, CAP does not owe Noble one red cent. This is a major achievement for the government of Jamaica. More importantly, an achievement for the Ministry of Finance and the Public Service and the Ministry of Mining working together. As you can understand, Madam Speaker, these developments also provide positive momentum to the incorporation process. So let me just recap and put it in a nutshell prior to the fire. So due to the restructuring engineered...
The Minister's time for speaking has expired.
Madam Speaker, I ask that the Minister be allowed sufficient time to complete his presentation.
The question before the House is that the Minister be given sufficient time to complete his presentation. Those in favour? Aye. Those against? The ayes have it. Minister, you may continue.
So after losing $700 million over 16 years, CAP was profitable for the first half of this year, before the fire. Right? After draining cash for several years, CAP had positive cash flows for this financial year. And after owing Noble and Glencore substantial sums for all, if not most, of the last 15 years, today CAP owes Noble not one red cent. So, Madam Speaker, we were doing extremely well. And then the fire in September brought production at Jamaica to a halt and interrupted this record of transformation of CAP. It was a tremendous blow, and it speaks to the vulnerability of Jamaica. How many times have we had that kind of, you make 2 steps forward and you have to go back 1 step for things outside of your control, the pandemic being an example in the context of the fiscal transformation of Jamaica. It was a tremendous blow, Madam Speaker. The fire is a major threat to Jamaica's economic recovery. Jamaica, let me just put it in a nutshell. Jamaica has a capacity to produce 1.2 million tons of aluminum. Prices vary on the world market, but today it's about $330 a ton. Let's just use that at full production. So with Jamaica producing 0 right now because it's down, it represents an annualized loss to the economy of $400 million US. That is as if 45%. No, yeah, but you remember all of it is produced here. So the production value of 400 million is all produced here. Yes, 55% of the revenues accrues to Noble, but the production value. Today, that nothing is happening because of the fire. It's as if you took the BPO industry and wiped most of it out overnight. That's the equivalent of what has happened to us since September. The immediate priority, Madam Speaker, therefore, of the new board is to work with our joint venture partners, Noble, to chart the course for the restart of production in the quickest possible time and to reevaluate the strategic options for the reconstruction of the powerhouse. This requires detailed consideration as the issues involved are complex and technical. We have to recognize that Noble has the capacity to be nimbler than the government of Jamaica. And now more than ever, when we are racing against the clock, we have to know how to use that to the advantage of the Jamaica joint venture and ultimately to CAP and the government of Jamaica with appropriate measures that provide necessary assurance. And let me be very clear, we are racing against the clock, and I will illustrate that later. The insurance claim related to the fire was submitted. There's an overall claim of $250 million US to cover business interruption, reconstruction, and exceptional costs. The business interruption tranche allows for administrative expenses to be addressed while the power plant reconstruction takes place. So while we have not exhausted that cap, we are okay because the business interruption insurance is going to release its funding for the operations to be paid. But the mining part of the operations are completely down because we don't need any bauxite. So all of the people working in mining, all of the haulage contractors, all of the people working on that section of the business are out of a job. There is the risk that if reconstruction takes longer than required, the cap for business interruption could be exhausted. So the limit for the insurance is $250 million US. Some of it is business interruption, some of it is capital reconstruction. If we take too long to reconstruct, then the business interruption will exhaust the insurance proceeds, and when it comes time to construct, you don't have enough. And that is why time is of the essence, and we cannot be distracted from this major imperative. The shareholders of Jamaica, which are CAP and Noble, will there have to be smart, practical, business-like, strategic, and technically proficient. The parallel priority for the new board will be to continue the work towards incorporation of Jamaica. As I said earlier, this work has been underway for much of the past 4 years. Substantial progress has been made over that time, and the legal agreements to give effect to incorporation have been substantially agreed, with the exception of a handful of major items to be resolved. The last mile, though, as we all know, can be the most difficult at times. The board will be required to familiarize themselves with where we have reached with incorporation as we work towards finalizing this strategic initiative. The vision of the government is that it eventually owns its 45% stake in an incorporated Jamaica, and that we proceed to take our interest public on the Jamaica Stock Exchange. or to take Jamaica public on the Jamaica Stock Exchange. Since the emergence of the bauxite industry in the 1960s, no Jamaican, to the best of my knowledge, has ever had a direct economic interest in an alumina bauxite plant in Jamaica. This government will change that. Jamaicans will have the opportunity to directly own a piece of a major industrial asset operating in our bauxite alumina industry. This vision is within reach, Madam Speaker. And to implement this vision, by working along with our partners, Noble Corporation, in my capacity as a responsible minister and with the approval of Cabinet, I've appointed the following board. Chairman, Professor Gordon Shirley. Professor Shirley's credentials and experience are widely known. What is often forgotten is that Professor Shirley is first and foremost a mechanical engineer. A mechanical engineer who started his career in the 1970s and early 1980s at Alcan. I am confident that Professor Shirley can lead the board towards achievement of the policy objectives we have set. Mr. Alok Jan. Mr. Jan is a former head of corporate finance and advisory business of PwC for the Caribbean. He's a chartered accountant with an impressive track record in that field, and he's known advisor at the OPM. Mr. Patrick McIntosh. Mr. McIntosh is an engineer who spent 20 years at Windalco, a major bauxite alumina plant, the last 6 of which he spent as managing director of Windalco, a Jamaican who ran a major bauxite plant. Among other things, Mr. McIntosh will bring the skills and experiences that will be useful in the reconstruction effort. Dr. Dana Dixon. Dr. Dixon is Chief Development Officer and Chief Marketing Officer at the Jamaica National Group. She's a seasoned management professional with experience in both private and public sectors. Mr. Winston Hayden. Mr. Hayden is a former managing director of CAP, demitted office in 2018. With an abrupt change of boards at such a strategically critical juncture and the need to get up to speed quickly, Mr. Hayden represents a reservoir of institutional knowledge that the board will benefit from. Ms. Maura Williamson. Ms. Williamson is a civil engineer with project management and procurement expertise garnered from senior assignments at the National Works Agency. Her experience and understanding of all of matters engineering will be useful in the reconstruction effort. Mr. Jerry Johnson. Mr. Johnson is the former Caribbean head of the IDB, of the Inter-American Development Bank. He's an experienced finance and development professional whose expertise will assist CAP in the strategic choices it confronts. Ms. Roxanne Smith. Ms. Smith is an attorney at law with an MBA in public sector management who brings legal skills to the board. And Ms. Stephanie Abrahams is a senior analyst at the Ministry of Finance and the Public Service with an MBA who can take on analytical work that may be required. Madam Speaker, there is no political divide when it comes to CAP. CAP is a macro-critical asset of tremendous fiscal importance, and we have to get this right. With this board in place, Madam Speaker, the contract in question in the public domain, which expired on October 11th, with this board in place, there's no of that. Madam Speaker, I will be focused as the responsible minister on moving forward with achieving the strategic objectives of CAP as outlined, as this is a macro-critical mission of tremendous fiscal importance to Jamaica. Thank you.
Madam Speaker, while I acknowledge the desire for the Minister to move forward, I think it's also very important that we know what took place and that persons who may have been in breach of the government's own guidelines are held accountable. So my first question is to the Minister is, has the Auditor General been invited to conduct a probe in CAP in terms of the issues that led to the resignation of the board, the issues that led to this consulting contract, has the Auditor General been invited, or has the Auditor General already entered on the reference in this regard? Secondly, the board is a good board. The individuals, the new board, let me be clear, the individuals are all competent. From the names I've seen, they are persons of integrity. The only question I would ask is that the effort at reconstruction, I believe, will require full-time effort, more than just individuals on the board with this level of expertise. So I don't know what provision is in place to have individuals who can spend all their time, given how important this asset is to our economic recovery, at ensuring that all the things are done properly. And then my third question is, while I know there are a lot of uncertainties and complexities, I'm sure you would have had some scenarios to determine projected timeframes for reconstruction and possible the re-emergence of production. So I don't know whether you have even an indication if, for example, in a best case scenario, the insurance payments are made in the time frame that you envision. When do you see Jamaica being in a position to restart production? And you have already given all the important reasons in terms of the importance to the economy, the contribution to economic growth. So I think it is important that we have an idea, if you do, or if it's something that the new board will examine. Thanks. I know CAP had a very small management team. I think it's about 5 persons or somewhere of that nature. Is that team going to remain in place? Yeah, the general manager plus some other staff. I think it was fairly small. Will that team remain in place to work with the new board, or is the new board going to have a free hand in determining who the management team will be?
Madam Speaker, thank you for the questions. The first question, well, let me deal with some of the question as on full time. CAP is an unincorporated joint venture with Noble, who are the managing partners in that relationship. That's what the joint venture agreement says. So the people who are actually doing the doing are the managing partners. They are the persons on the ground. There are Jamaicans sometimes who are appointed to Jamaica and can perform those duties. CAP has 5 full-time employees. At this point in time, I don't see that number expanding, but if it may well need to. But that is historically what has been in place. What CAP is required to do is to receive information from the managing partners, receive analysis, ask the right questions, ensure that those questions are properly answered, have lawyers for sure, have accountants for sure, and make decisions with that range of information coming to their possession. The full-time complement really rests in Jamaica, where the managing partner has day-to-day operating responsibilities. With respect to the question of when will production restart, you can understand through you, Madam Speaker, that's not something I want to be definitive on. The strategy is to very quickly try to make less than optimal start, but to start soon, so at least some production is happening, even that production is not optimally priced, so that the amount that we use in business interruption proceeds goes down. So instead of having losses of X per month, if you can kind of start production up on a limp, with it costing you more than it would cost normally, but you reduce the losses from X to half X, So you save more money for the reconstruction effort. And the idea is to try and get that done in a few months. But it depends on us being able to move really quickly and to basically as well to support Noble in some of the things that may need to happen. I give you an example. An example would be you have to import boilers, something that I think is a real live issue. Have to import boilers for a quick turnaround, but to import the boilers from the supplier needs an LC. Well, CAP as a government is not in a position to easily and quickly. It can with a lot of effort, but easily and quickly mount an LC. So do you piggyback on the LC from Noble and recoup them expenses? The Noble LC, because Noble is not exactly in the best of financial positions, that LC might be priced badly or priced highly, but you have to be practical. As between a badly priced LC and getting the stuff up and running in 2 months versus getting it up in 6 months, you nagging over a badly priced LC, you may be missing the forest for the trees, or whatever the expression is. So that's the response to that. With respect to the management, the board has the full remit of any board to review the performance of management. If they find it wanting, they can, do. But I would encourage not to jump to assumptions so early. But the question that's been asked is that the board will have the normal responsibilities and powers of any board, and to the extent that there's underperformance in any area, they will be empowered to make changes. Absolutely. With respect to the question about whether or not the Auditor General has initiated sort of a information gathering sort of activities, the answer to that is in the affirmative. That this is certainly the matter, procurement matter with that contractor is something that would invite her to find out more. So I can answer that in its affirmative.
I mean, you said information gathering. Should I take that to mean an investigation?
Well, I don't want to. That's a loaded term. I mean, normally, no, it is a loaded term. Yes, but these engagements start. No, the engagement starts with requesting information. Right. So I'm just being factual. Yeah.
Yeah. Minister, I recall well when Noble first came to Jamaica, because CAP and Jamaica had our backs against the wall. The arrangements with Glencore were severely unattractive, and Noble really was a huge relief when they expressed their willingness to come in here and pre-finance amounts of money that could get rid of Glencore. Of course, they, as a commercial operation, sought the best terms they could get at the time. But they have proved themselves to be good partners, I think, over the time since. And I'm glad that relationship is continuing. I notice you say we don't owe them 1 red cent. Of course, you've had to put up 200 million of government resources to lend CAP so that they could pay off Noble. So you've just moved money from the government to CAP to pay off Noble. So that money is now owed by CAP to the government instead of to Noble, including, I think, 60 million US worth of obligations that were not accruing interest, and which the DOJ will be funding, presumably, with a cost of funds perhaps attached, funds being fungible. There will be some cost attributable to that. So at the end of the day, my question is, how much money does CAP now owe the government of Jamaica or any of its entities? I know at one time the Petrocarib Fund had advanced money to CAP. That's all been absorbed into central government. I don't know if there are any other public bodies that advance money to CAP, but You put in 200 million US in the last 18 months, and there was presumably a large balance before. So my question to you is, how much money does CAP owe the government of Jamaica now? I notice you say you want to take it, put it on the Jamaica Stock Exchange. The nature of, put Jamaica on, but the nature of this business, as you know, it's easy to get it wrong. You have inputs which are subject to the vagaries of world market pricing. The plant itself will require capital expenditure on an ongoing basis to keep the plant its competitiveness in a range where it can compete in a global market for alumina. One just wonders how an entity like that, with one big corporate shareholder, Noble Group, and 45%, if that's what it is, held by Jamaican shareholders, when it needs cash, which is operating cash flows can't cover because the price of this input has gone through the roof, or there's a fire, or some other calamity has occurred, or alumina prices fall and they're operating at a loss. How is that going to be sustained where shareholders on the Jamaica Stock Exchange are not accustomed to being asked to fund capital calls for entities that they invest in? So, CAP has shown itself to be an operation which has required, and Jamaica has shown itself to be an operation that has required constant support over the years from its partners, joint venture partners. And although, yes, you've managed to enter into a better sale agreement with Glencore, having put in 200 million to pay them out, I'm sure that was a sweetener for that. But, going forward, how is it going to work when Jamaica needs additional resources? You say you'll have a balance sheet, but the fundamentals of the arrangement are what they are. It's a business. The legal construct, whether it's a partnership or it's an incorporated entity, the fundamentals of the business, the assets, the liabilities, the expenditure, the expenses, or the revenues are what they are. And we know that it's a business which is difficult, very vulnerable to the vagaries of the world market. And when one just wonders how that 45% in the hands of the public, without being deep-pocketed shareholders, how that disequilibrium between Noble on the one hand, the majority shareholder, and the many Jamaican shareholders after it's divested through the stock market, how that will work if and when it requires support from its shareholders.
The member's time
but the
for
first
speaking.
question is the size of debt.
Your time, but the member's time for speaking has expired.
Sorry. Thanks for the question, Madam Speaker. The reason. Madam Speaker, the reason why it is appropriate to celebrate the fact that we don't owe Noble 1 red cent is because owing Noble, with whom we have to negotiate, represents leverage that, and let's not personalize it to Noble. Before Noble it was Glencore, before Glencore it was someone else, Alcoa. It represents leverage that they have that can serve to undermine Jamaica's position. Without paying Noble back, we would not have been able to rescue ourselves from that alumina sales agreement, which led to losses of 90 million US in a year, 80 million US in a year, 70 million US in a year, as the market moved adversely during many years in that 2005 to 2021 period. So it is of absolute significance that the government of Jamaica could find itself in a position in the middle of a pandemic to pay, because we had planned for it and that was a part of the sale of assets to pay down on debt, to pay Noble off the $137 million that we owed and in interest-paying liabilities and the $60 million that we owed in working capital. That allowed us to get out of an alumina sales agreement that still had, along with the agreement to pay the 2% commission, that still had 5 years to go. Yeah, absolutely. And that's an agreement where we'd have been today and next year and the year after that, we'd have been selling our alumina at prices that would not necessarily, well, that would be below. No, well, certainly now, and certainly for the last 7 or 8 years, below the market prices. So it was absolutely important to be able to renegotiate, and that's why we celebrated. Now, and it's necessary to celebrate and to recognize a major achievement that was not something, it was a negotiated position and something that took a lot of effort to convince them of. Now, you asked, how much does CAP owe the government of Jamaica? I disclosed to you that over the last 16 years, the government of Jamaica has financed CAP, and I use that expression, to the tune of $800 million US. Now, not all of that is not on the books as 800 million because the financing has taken different forms. A major portion of that 800 million came when the government of Jamaica, through its agencies, assumed, I think it was about $400 million US of CAP liabilities in and around 2013, 2014. So 800 of the 400 represented that transaction. 400 of the 800 was in that transaction. 200 of the 800 is in these two, 137 plus 60. And then over the years, we've had other amounts, some of which have been repaid. Okay, so there's a 20 million that was loaned in the beginning of 2017 that was paid back. Okay, so when I say 800 million in financing, there have been portions of it have been, like there's a 20 million facility in 2017, which under the fund program, we had to find ways for them to pay back. But amounts not paid back are the 400 million that was just assumed by central government and the 200 million that we have lent them over the past 4 years. With respect to the IPO, it's important not to judge or not to transfer the experience of CAP to what the experience would be like to have a stake in a bauxite alumina concern. CAP lost money for structural issues, some of which are unrelated to the economics of the plant. CAP would have, because the government, it originated with the government needing money, and the government, at some point in the past, had CAP sell its alumina forward at prices that turned out to be unfavorable based on where the market went. And that led to a dissonance between costs and revenues. While that was happening, CAP's partner did extremely well. So, because they didn't have those constraints. So CAP's experience is not experience that describes the economics of that asset. The economics of that asset over a long period of time has been largely favorable. Now, the mining industry, bauxite alumina, is a cyclical industry everywhere in the world. In our hemisphere, in Chile and Peru, massive mine, and Colombia, huge mining economies, and we see it. You know, this year those economies are booming because commodity prices are going up and they're doing well. You know, when we had a crash last year, they sank like how tourism would make us sing, right? Very, very cyclical industry. But the world is filled with mining concerns, even single plant mining concerns that are publicly traded. This would not be the first and only one. What you want to ensure is that the legal entity is properly capitalized and that its capital structure is conducive to the kind of cyclical industry where prices go up and down. And you want to make sure you have the right people on the board and managing it. That in good times, they don't dividend out all the money and make frivolous decisions, but that they manage it over the entire economic cycle. So we'll have to ensure that it's when we talk about taking it public, we're talking about taking public an appropriately capitalized entity. Well, it's premature to, because right now we don't even, it's unincorporated. We don't even have a balance sheet. So it would be inappropriate to commit to any particular form. But the idea is to have, a properly capitalized entity that we take public, and where the capital structure is aligned to the cyclicality of the industry. And that's, you know, the point on the structure is that it, for a government, a cash-strapped government, you know, it doesn't suit us at all. I mean, it's like governments have tried over 16 years to. We think we're within striking distance and close, and with the support of this House, and as I said before, there's no political divide that I believe is justified on this matter, and I don't believe any exists. And with the support of this House, we'll get it done.
Madam Speaker.
Minister Tufton.
The Minister of Health, Honorable Christopher Tufton, will now make his presentation. Thank you.
Minister Tufton, Minister of Health and Wellness.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I wish to use this opportunity to update the Honourable House and members of the public on matters related to COVID-19 pandemic, as the Ministry of Health and Wellness, working with the Jamaican people and the government, of course, continues to manage the situation in country, and while also monitoring the developments around the world. Firstly, Madam Speaker, I must thank the hardworking and dedicated healthcare workers and other frontline workers who, Madam Speaker, continue to blaze a trail of excellent service to our country. Because of their efforts, we are now at a manageable stage of the third wave of having safeguarded the vulnerable among us. In the last 24 hours, Madam Speaker, Jamaica confirmed 27 new cases of COVID-19 and recorded, regrettably, one death that was previously under investigation. Our weekly positivity rate continues to decline, and for the last 7 days, that is the 7-day average, we are now hovering around 7%. It is not below the 5% we want to be, but the trend, Madam Speaker, is moving in the right direction. Yesterday's positivity rate was 3.3%, which is a very good look and a good outlook if this trajectory continues. Madam Speaker, most of the COVID-19 indicators are pointing in the right direction. The level of geographic spread of the virus is at a medium level, with just over 25% of communities across the island being affected with new cases. There was a time, Madam Speaker, when quite a bit more, indeed, closer to 100%. We are now at 25% of communities, which means, again, the trend in the right direction. Again, Madam Speaker, I believe all of us in this Honourable House will join me in commending our healthcare and frontline workers who have really kept to their task, and sometimes we're a bit hard on them, we're hard on us, but that's fine too. But I think we must recognize them for their heroic service. We are not fully out of the woods as yet, however, Madam Speaker, as bed occupancy remains under high pressure, with over 300 persons in hospital for suspected or confirmed COVID-19 cases. You may recall that we have approximately just over 700 beds, so approximately 300 occupied. This is still an area of concern as we move into the end of the year, where the general occupancy in hospital tends to increase. The vaccination rate, Madam Speaker, remains low at 18.6% of the entire population being fully vaccinated. That's 18.6%. Madam Speaker, it's about 27% of the targeted population, the target that we had set when we started. This low level of vaccination has minimal effect on transmission, and therefore we have to remain vigilant. We must increase the vaccination rate, and again, like a stock record, we continue as a government to encourage the public who are not yet vaccinated to get vaccinated as the best form of defense. Madam Speaker, in terms of the new variant, the vaccination program is even more important, as we know that where there is significant transmission, there is opportunity for the virus to mutate. As many Jamaicans may have been aware, on November 26, 2021, a variant of COVID-19 was uncovered, and the WHO designated the variant B11529, a variant of concern named Omicron, on the advice of the WHO's Technical Advisory Group on Virus Evolution. I take this opportunity, Madam Speaker, on behalf of the Government of Jamaica to caution Jamaicans to remain vigilant as we see the variant spread to various countries since its announcement. This variant has now been identified in 19 countries, according to the WHO, in all four regions of the world. Preliminary evidence suggests, Madam Speaker, there may be an increased risk of reinfection with Omicron. It is not yet clear, however, whether this variant is more transmissible. Neither is it the severity of the variant known when compared to others. Additionally, Madam Speaker, the WHO is working with its technical partners to understand the potential impact of this variant on our existing countermeasures, including vaccines. So much work is being done. It is a new variant of concern nevertheless, and we will have to continue to monitor the global environment and the experts and their positions as we seek to provide information to the public. In keeping with our previous protocols, once variants are uncovered, and as a precaution, Madam Speaker, Jamaica has imposed restrictions on travelers from a number of African countries. The countries are Botswana, Lesotho, Mozambique, Namibia, South Africa, and Zimbabwe. All persons who are not citizens or permanent residents of Jamaica and who have visited these countries within the last 14 days will not be allowed entry into Jamaica. All Jamaican citizens and permanent residents, Madam Speaker, who have visited the named countries within the last 14 days will be allowed entry. However, they will be subject to mandatory testing and state-supervised quarantine for no less than 14 days. Travel bans, Madam Speaker, slows the transmission and the introduction into our population of these new strains. The truth is, persons have commented on the measures that we have taken, some critically, and question the motive and even insinuated at whether or not we have done so in the past to other jurisdictions and other countries. I want to remind the country, this Parliament, Madam Speaker, that a travel ban on the UK when the Alpha variant was announced was implemented, a travel ban on India when the Delta variant was announced, and a travel ban on South American countries when the Brazilian Mu and Lambda variants were detected. So this position taken by the government is not new, and it's not a rush because the variant was discovered in any particular region. And worse, any insinuation that somehow it is discriminatory must be pushed back, rejected. This is about protecting the Jamaican population, Madam Speaker. While it is not practical, Madam Speaker, to have travel bans on all 19 countries where the new variant has been detected, we can slow the transmission and introduction in country by imposing restrictions from areas where most cases are detected until more information is available. So the issue here is not necessarily that we will keep the new variant out, because we are an open society. Business has to continue, and the new variant is moving from one jurisdiction to the next. The issues around travel ban has always been to slow down the introduction of the variant to our population while we seek to understand the variant, its characteristics, and prepare to deal with it when it gets here. And that has been how we have taken the decisions all along. And indeed, it is guided by best practices and protocols. I want to speak quickly, Madam Speaker, to our genome sequencing infrastructure. Madam Speaker, we are well informed that all viruses evolve, and most changes have little to no impact on the virus properties. And in our experience, however, some changes to the SARS-CoV-2 virus lead to variants that affect the virus's transmissibility, the severity of the disease, and the efficacy of the vaccine available across the world today. This highlights the need for more advanced, which is the point, diagnostic tools and the need for continuous surveillance. In this regard, Madam Speaker, the country acquired, as was announced, in late October, a genome sequencing machine to test for COVID-19 variants locally. Currently, we are finalizing, Madam Speaker, training dates with the manufacturer and selecting the samples that will be used during the training period. Madam Speaker, at this time we are looking also at acquiring a second sequencing or sequencer through lease funding from the CDC, and construction work has begun at the National Public Health Lab, where this second sequencer will be housed. Madam Speaker, just to elaborate a bit on this, we would have liked to have commissioned this machine earlier, but we have to coordinate with the manufacturers. And there is a global demand for the training and the experts who are limited for commissioning this type of machine. And the reports I have from the University Hospital of the West Indies coordinating with the ministry's personnel is that, in a sense, we're in a queue. But we do expect that those personnel will come in, hopefully over the next week or so, for training to take place, and all is set for the testing and for the personnel, so we can go right into it, even as we build out to acquire a second machine in the months to come. As those details are being finalized, however, Madam Speaker, we continue to collaborate with PAHO, CDC, and CARFA to send samples for genome sequencing. This week alone, we have sent some 49 samples to PAHO, 80 to CDC, and 20 to CARFA. In other words, while we await our own capacities, we are sending samples overseas to 3 locations in this instance, and the test will be done for all the variants of concern. Madam
The Minister's
Speaker.
time for speaking has expired.
Madam Speaker, allow sufficient time. Minister to
Question is, we
complete
allow the
his
minister sufficient time to complete his presentation. Those in favour? Those against? The ayes have it. Minister Tufton.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Madam Speaker, and thanks to my colleagues. Madam Speaker, on a note of on testing, Madam Speaker, in collaboration with JANAC, which is under the Ministry of Investment, Industry, Investment and Commerce, the Ministry of Health and Wellness has made contact with some 52 labs to participate in the inter-lab comparison by the National Public Health Lab to expand our COVID-19 testing capacity. Now, we have had some discussion both here and in the public domain around expanding our lab capacity to increase the options for testing. Some have identified high cost of testing with few options. And the government, the cabinet, has committed to expanding that capacity, and already work has begun. Of that number, Madam Speaker, 14 labs have been, of the 52 that is, that have been identified by JANAC. 14 have been non-responsive, 2 were previously approved, with another 3 recently approved, and by Friday, December 4th, 2021, we are hoping to have, Madam Speaker, another 7 labs complete the inter-lab comparison with a view to being approved. Within another 10 days, Madam Speaker, if there is timely return of samples and the resultant success in the inter-lab comparison, we could have 18 testing sites fully operational. This is moving from 12, which we have currently. We encourage, Madam Speaker, the testing sites that are engaged to submit the test panel results as soon as possible. And at the same time, Madam Speaker, the Ministry is encouraging the use of testing kits approved by the FDA and WHO, and these kits are also subject to review and approval by the Ministry. So the 2 issues quickly, Madam Speaker: the expansion of lab capacity. There is a simple process that is involved. The Public Health Lab sends a panel of samples. They know the results of those tests for those samples. Those entities will take that panel and do the test, so they get 15 samples, for example, and they'll return the results, depending, including a margin of error. If they meet up to 80% accuracy in determining positive or negative, then they are certified or validated to become a testing site. And to date, we have had some successes and will continue to work with JANAC and the Public Health Lab and those labs in order to increase the numbers. It's important that we do that because the false negatives or false positives doesn't help the management of the COVID-19 response. Similarly, Madam Speaker, I want to take the opportunity to say that we are, the government that is, in support of expanding the test kits that are available on the market based on FDA and WHO approvals, and we are encouraging private entities to apply to the Standards and Regulations Division. Once those test kits meet the standards of the FDA, and there are over 30 such kits, including self-administered kits, we will quickly process and validate and allow permits or permission to import. To date, we have had a few applicants. We are encouraging others to come on board, Madam Speaker. In terms of vaccination implementation, Madam Speaker, we continue to manage the pandemic and prepare for a possible 4th wave of COVID-19 infections. Our best defense, of course, is to increase the vaccine uptake among the population. As at 10 a.m., a total of 1.1 million doses of COVID-19 vaccines were administered in the country. Of that number, 599,000, I'm rounding the numbers now, were first doses, 440,000 second doses, and 68,000 were single doses of the Johnson & Johnson. And that, of course, totals about 18.6% of the total population, approximately 27% of the targeted population. We are behind, Madam Speaker, in our inoculation program, and that is no longer a function of a lack of availability of vaccines or even vaccine sites. it really now is up to the Jamaican people, and we continue to encourage take-up. So I want to use this medium to again say that your best defense is to get vaccinated. With the Christmas season approaching, we will see an increase in movement and exposure, with a resultant increase in the number of cases. In the face, Madam Speaker, of a fourth wave, and this idea of a fourth wave, Madam Speaker, should not be news to us. We have said it over and over. The Honourable Prime Minister has spoken about it, and the truth is it's happening right across the world as we speak, even in cases where there are high vaccination levels. With, however, the likelihood of a fourth wave and a new variant, this virus can swiftly move through the population, affecting many. We want to make a special appeal, the Ministry of Health, the government, to our elderly persons who can become ill and indeed, based on history, are likely to suffer the worst fate, including the possibility of dying from the COVID-19 virus. We want to say to them, please, get vaccinated. Those persons 50 and older, 60 and older, more importantly, we still have a fair bit of that population who are still not vaccinated. In terms of vaccines, Madam Speaker, and vaccine brands, to increase the number of persons being vaccinated, I would like to announce, based on the approval, discussion by Cabinet and subsequent approval, that the Ministry will allow some 50,000 doses of the Pfizer vaccine to be made available to the general population. And this, Madam Speaker, will be effective at 10 a.m. on Wednesday, December 1st. So Jamaicans over 18 years and older are invited to visit the Ministry's website to make an appointment to receive a first dose of the Pfizer vaccines. Now remember, 12 to 18 are already entitled, or students, and we're working, of course, through the Ministry of Education. And in response to the earlier question to my colleague, Minister Williams, yes, there is enough to ensure that our age cohort 12 to 18 get their first and second dose, as long as they are willing to take it up with the support of their parents. And we did also allow 50 and over to have access to that brand. We are now saying we have up to 50,000 doses available for all age cohort. And that will be based on appointments. So we encourage Jamaicans to use the appointment system and to take advantage of the numbers that is on offer. As it relates to administering booster shots, we continue to be guided by the World Health Organization. The WHO has still not recommended, Madam Speaker, the booster shots to the general population. However, an interim guidance on vaccination for severely immunocompromised individuals by the WHO has recommended an additional dose of the COVID-19 vaccine to be administered to persons who are likely to have not mounted an adequate immune response with 1 or 2 doses of the vaccine. This includes persons with active cancers, organ transplant recipients, persons with immunodeficiency disease such as HIV, and persons on immunosuppressive drugs. In other words, Madam Speaker, if your immune system is compromised, and your doctor would be the person best to advise on that, there are guidelines that supports a 3rd dose, and with that support from your doctor, you can make that request, and the public health team or your private doctor, Madam Speaker, can benefit from that. We announced this additional dose, Madam Speaker, in early November, and we remind members of the public that the recommendation applies to persons who are severely compromised in terms of their immune system and are in the vaccine-eligible age group. These persons are required to obtain a letter from their doctor stating their eligibility and take to the vaccination site that letter. Doctors who treat several of these patients should contact their parish health department to get access to the vaccine to administer to their patients, whether they are private public sector medical practitioners. We note that the manufacturer, and this is important because of all the questions that have been asked, of the AstraZeneca vaccine has not yet recommended a booster dose. We have gotten a lot of questions about why not give a booster dose of the AstraZeneca brand, and many are insisting on it in light of the possibility of expiration and dumping of AstraZeneca. The reality is we have to be guided by the science, and if the manufacturers don't recommend it and the authorities, the WHO, the UK, EU, Canada, Australia, and the US do not recommend the AstraZeneca, then the question is, what is the justification for us? The booster. What is the justification for us to do that? And I know that persons are insisting, but I don't think a responsible government and indeed health authority can take it upon themselves to make that recommendation if the very manufacturer has not. And I think that is important to make. We know, Madam Speaker, that the recommendation for boosters in the UK, EU, Canada, Australia, and the US include the use of Moderna, Pfizer, and Johnson & Johnson vaccines. So those are recommended as boosters. Jamaica is currently in negotiation with suppliers to get enough of Pfizer. We're expected to get 2 more shipments before the year is out. We're also discussing the possibility of Moderna as another brand. And of course, we have J&J in abundance with more to come. And we'll make a formal announcement as it relates to booster shots once we secure these volumes, hopefully in the near future. Madam Speaker, I wish to caution members of this Honourable House and the members of the public that as we enter the festive season, we must remain vigilant in our infection prevention and control measures, as COVID-19 remains a clear and present danger. The potential of a 4th wave is real, as said earlier, and based on the projections from the surveillance team, could see up to 11,000 new cases during the peak week and the possibility of up to 400 deaths if it goes unabated, if we do not take measures. That's the modeling for a potential 4th wave. And I feel obliged to say it because I don't want us to get complacent. This, of course, will mean an overwhelming of the public health system and will create another set of challenges which we are hoping not to have to deal with. We have a collective duty, Madam Speaker, to ensure that we do not experience this 4th wave, not certainly in the magnitude that could be possible, but we make every effort to ensure that we adhere to the protocols, the provisions under the Disaster Risk Management Act, and above all else, that we vaccinate before we celebrate. Madam Speaker, I thank you.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. I'd like to thank the Minister for the update that he's given to the House and indeed to the country. I too want to join him in thanking all the health workers who have done a tremendous work over the years, the year plus, in trying to keep this nation safe. Some have died in the process, but the vast majority of Jamaicans have been saved as a consequence of their work. The numbers that we are seeing now are declining. As the Minister indicated, the average over the past week is 7% positivity rate. And even though we have seen it gone to just above 3% today, 3.5%, it is still not at a place where we would like to see it until you see the weekly positivity rate going below 5%. So at this point in time, our healthcare workers who have been under the brunt of the work over the period of time can enjoy a little respite. And hopefully the pressure that they will come under will not necessarily come under if us as Jamaicans do our part. In as much as you mentioned, vaccination is what is going to prevent the fourth wave, Minister. We also have to be very conscious of the fact that the prevention, the mask wearing, the physical distancing, the hand washing and the sanitization are what are key. Because even in instances where we don't have vaccines, those are what have prevented people from dying and from the spread of the disease. So as much as we are trumpeting the cause of vaccination, we still need to remind the nation, as we did from day one, that the mask wearing, and Minister, you will have seen and would have seen people out there on the streets. I see them every day. All of us inside here see them. The mask is down here below the nose. It is covering the mouth, but the nostril is just breathing out potential virus to everyone. We need to continue to insist, and the program needs, Minister, from the Ministry of Health and from all of us to insist. I get into trouble sometimes because I go into stores and I say, but the mask should be over your nose, right? And they say, who are you to say that to me? I say, well, the mask should be over your nose. I'm going to report it to your supervisor. And they pull it up. But it's important that we continue to preach this, because unless we do that, even when we vaccinate and we have 65% of the population vaccinated, with the emerging and the changing variants that we are seeing, we're still going to have the problem of COVID-19 spreading. Minister, you mentioned about the ban, and there have been talk in certain quarters that the ban on the African countries was somewhat unfortunate, because it is not only there that the Omicron variant has been found, and there's concern that we have acted in a way that has there's no equity there. I hear your point about we banned from India when the variant was found there, and from South African countries. But there has been the talk about that. Now, you mentioned, Minister, that within the past week, 49 samples have been sent to the various partners for genomic sequencing. But what we'd like to know as well as a country is that prior to this week that the 49 were sent, what have been the numbers that have been sent on a continuous basis or consistent basis, so that Jamaica will know what is here, your authorities will know what is here, and how we can plan for that. To tell us today that 49 was sent within the past week leaves us in the dark as to what was sent before and what are the variants that are here and have been found so far. I'm happy that the genomic sequencing machine is here. I'm not too happy that we have not been utilizing it yet, but I understand the concerns and the arrangements that have been made, and it is hoped that we would have made those arrangements, or those arrangements would have come into place much earlier, Minister. But Minister, I was somewhat surprised that you mentioned that we are going to get one from CDC on a leased arrangement, and you announced in the Parliament some time ago that we're going to get two machines, one courtesy of Chase and the other courtesy of CDC. Is it from that time we knew it was a leased arrangement, or it was a gift or a grant to the people of Jamaica? Now, Minister, you mentioned about the testing and what is happening across the country. It is more in light of the potential for this new variant coming in that we increase the testing. But, I mean, of samples, that is.
The member's time for speaking has expired. Go on.
Yes, Madam Speaker,
you're wrapping up in a little while.
Thank you very much. Minister, the testing. We still see samples being tested that is taking an inordinately long time to get back to those from which it was sampled. I'll give you an example. A child went to Bustamante Hospital last week Monday, for a surgery last week Friday. The sample was done on Monday. Should have been back to the hospital in 48 hours, as is what we have been told by the National Public Health Lab. But when it on Thursday for admission, the sample was not back. So the child's surgery had to be pushed back for another week. We cannot have that, and this is replete across the country, Minister. There needs to be a tightening up of it. We have spoken to it before, and it's something that you need to get a handle on. You mentioned vaccination, Minister. There was an announcement recently by the Medical Association of Jamaica that there's a better arrangement that has been reached with the Ministry of Health as it relates to vaccination and private medical doctors getting it. Could you enlighten the Parliament as to what those new arrangements are? And, Minister, there was an article written by one of the medical doctors in this country about the booster shot for a patient and the inequity in the system in that the patient finally got the booster shot because it was covered by a letter from a consultant from University Hospital, as opposed to him who had sent a letter with more information than what the consultant had sent. Fortunately for the patient, they finally got the vaccination, as the booster vaccination. So, Minister, we need to sort out these things because unless, as you have said before, unless there's confidence, unless there's transparency, unless there's buy into the program, we are going to be continuously facing the problem of inadequate vaccination of our people and run the risk, as you have said at the start of your program, of your presentation, of increased variance as a result of less vaccination in this country. So I urge you to look at those. Thank you very much, Madam Speaker.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'll be brief. Thank the member for his questions. In terms of the ban that the member commented on, I thought I'd explain that this is an unusual position in the context of the virus and dealing with emerging threats or what is perceived at the time to be the origins of the emerging threat. We have done it with several other countries, and there is no malintent outside of protecting the population by slowing the virus and its spread. And so there it's not unfortunate. I wouldn't describe it as such. I just describe it as being cautious, and we must always err on the side of caution when it comes to our responsibility, our fiduciary responsibility to the people of Jamaica in this case. And I think that's what we have done. Having said that, the process is constantly under review. So to the extent that the threat dissipates, we will review, and we will do so in a relatively short period of time to avoid no inconvenience or limited inconvenience to those who are so affected. In terms of the samples sent out, it's not 49, just to be clear, 49 to PAHO, 80 to CDC, 20 to CARFA. And we continue. It is a weekly thing, or approximately weekly thing. When we get results that are out of the ordinary, we will announce, as we did with the previous new strain. If we get a result that suggests that this strain is here, then we will make it public. Up to this point, it has been the ones that we are accustomed to and we continue to deal with. In terms of the new sequencer, we did say we would get from CDC, and we're working on that. The issue right now is to get this one up and running, and the truth is we have to wait on the manufacturers, and we are in a queue for that. You raised the two issues around the testing and the length of time, and also the issue of a letter from a particular doctor rebooster. Those are two specific cases. If you give me the details of them, I'll check on it. But I don't know that this is always the case. I mean, while I do agree that you are going to find these cases, and when we identify them, we must deal with them, I can't use an anecdotal case to determine that that is
Minister,
a trend.
could you
have said that.
The matter of the delay in testing, I mentioned a particular case here, but it is right across the country. And if you have your people do a survey, you will find that this is happening. I am not saying the samples are not being done in 24, 48 hours. It is the results getting back to the sites where they originated from, which is creating the problem, unless we have that. And I know of many more examples. My time didn't allow me to do it, but I could have.
All right. All right, members, so my commitment is to check on that, and we can speak outside of this forum to further drill down. And then the final one you ask is about the private practitioners and the vaccination program. I don't know that there are any significant new arrangements. What I'll say, Madam Speaker, is that there may be greater clarity in terms of what the original arrangement proposed was. There are some challenges with engaging the private doctors. First of all, there needs to be a willingness, and we have had a limited percentage to date who have opted to take on the program, including yourself, and I want to commend you for that, member. But it also requires some effort. It requires storing the vaccine, so the integrity of the product so that it is effective, which means you have to have a dedicated storage infrastructure. And it involves also, which you know, member, you and I have spoken outside of this context on it, it involves a level of coordination to minimize waste. Because, Madam Speaker, to members of the House, if you break the vial and you have 10 or even 12 doses and you only do 2 persons for the day, you're going to have to discard the other 8. And it adds up very quickly. Sorry. If a doctor in his private practice only sees, unless he coordinates and says, I'll coordinate 10 persons to come in at a particular point in time. And we have seen a fairly, I am told, significant amount of waste. Now, we haven't complained about it because we would like persons to get vaccinated, but it's also a part of the discussion that is taking place. So we will continue to work with our private doctors, and we would like to see more on board. We would like to see more labs for testing, and we're giving the opportunity to private entities to come on board. We would like to see more test kits available, and we're encouraging persons, private enterprise, to apply FDA approval, and we will process. We, I believe, are very willing and ready and just require the support of the different stakeholders. Thank you.
Minister, I have one question for you. Your presentation indicates 18.6% of the population is now vaccinated. Could you tell the House, in terms of senior citizens, say persons over 60 or wherever that threshold is, what percentage of that population is now fully vaccinated? Given the frailties, the vulnerabilities of that group, I think we need to have that data. If you broken out by persons over 50, persons over 60, persons over 70 and up, but just without that slicing and dicing today, do you have a feel for what percentage of our seniors, persons say over 60, are fully vaccinated now?
Yeah, thank you, member. We do have the data. We classify the data in periods of decades. And so the highest percentage of vaccination now is above that 50 and over. And indeed, the highest is between 60 and 80. I don't have the details, but it's between 40 and 50%, somewhere in that region. I think 40 little. But I can't give you the specific details. Having said that, they are the most vulnerable. And in light of the potential threat, we really do need to encourage them. And so what we are discussing now internally is how do we pivot the messaging, the targeted approach, the community engagement. We're putting more mobile buses on the road, and I could go on to try to get that population, even while we place emphasis on our kids to get them back in school, because any fourth wave or new variant will place the highest risk on that 60 and over. And so we ask you to join us in making that plea. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Through you, Madam Speaker, and as the Minister touched on the fourth wave, and seeing that there are other countries around the world, especially in Europe, now seeing a fourth wave, what preparation the Ministry is now currently making, since we are expecting that fourth wave at some point, oxygen, beds and supplies? Can the Minister give us an update on what preparations are being made?
So, Madam Speaker, thank you. So we model, I really have to single out our epidemiology unit These are the statisticians in public health who look at the virus and make projections on what a possible wave would mean in terms of the demands on our public health system. And they have really done a good job if you look at what they have projected in the past and based on what is likely to happen. So we start there and we determine therefore what the potential risks are, and in particular on the health system. How many persons we're going to have to admit, how many will require a ventilator, etc., etc. And based on that data, we start by informing the public to try to minimize that threat. And this is what we're doing now. We will embark on a communication program to continue to advise persons to be vigilant. Secondly, the audit of our hospital arrangements, the list that you have just outlined, and others. So our field hospitals, as you know, are in place. We have one that we are now building out, which we anticipate will be completed before the end of the year. This is in Sav, in Westmoreland. So that's under construction as we speak. That will add another 40 or 50 beds. There are others. There's Spanish Town, Maypen, and Falmouth, and also St. Joseph's. Those were field hospitals prepared. While we have adjusted some of the bed numbers to facilitate non-COVID patients, our doctors, our medical staff are well aware that we pivot back once that demand is there. And then in terms of supplies, whether through the NHF or oxygen, we meet with our supplier, we give them the projections so that they put in place based on what they can produce as well as what they would need to import. The last time we had an issue, it wasn't so much about what they could produce. They had maxed out their local capacity. Problem is that they weren't able to bring in, even though they had made the order. So those are some of the things that we're doing, and we are very conscious, very sensitive to the possibilities, and indeed are planning for it, because this virus has established a fairly predictable pattern, and vaccination, of course, being the key defense, which we continue to encourage.
Minister, I just have one question and really recommendation. As we move forward to reopening schools, I believe it is imperative that we allow and provide testing in the schools. All right? What is going to happen without testing in the schools? When the children get sick, their parents can't afford the significant fees to privately test them. They're going to keep sending them to school because they don't have either the support at home to keep them at home. So we're going to have sick children continue to go to school. It might mean doing the antigen test, which is cheaper than the PCR test, but as we move to reopen the schools, we must have some capacity, particularly in larger schools. I mean, Excelsior, my constituency, is 2,200 students, right? You're bound to have sick children infecting others. And right now, it is too difficult, it is too expensive for persons to get tested.
So, Madam Speaker, I think there's no difference of opinion there. The reality is that the school population is going to be a point of vulnerability. Not so much, to be totally frank, for the students who could weather the storm, so to speak, in terms of the virus, because they are stronger immune systems, but more so for those they take it home to, their parents and grandparents. And we still have a large unvaccinated population among that older age cohort, which is why we have to pursue a dual strategy: promote vaccination among the older population and offer protection to our young people to get the face-to-face. Testing will be available based on an assessment of conditions or symptoms, and I'm prepared to ask for some amount of random testing as part of sort of just sampling a population. And I think that can be easily organized because, contrary to popular opinion that I've seen on social media and so on, the government provides free testing. I do appreciate that you can't just go and request it because it is given based on a doctor's assessment. Now, where a school has a sick bay or otherwise, because we're always in touch with the schools, we're putting protocols in place, and a child displays the slightest symptom, then they will be automatically tested and that conclusion drawn in order to protect the rest of the population. So I'm with you on that. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Madam Speaker. Oh. Yeah.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Minister, on page 7 of your statement, where you spoke to vaccination implementation, it's very disheartening when we hear of thousands, sometime over 100,000 doses of vaccine being dumped because the expiration date is passed. We know we have the challenge of vaccine hesitancy, very great, and those who are anti-vaxxers. You indicate that 1.1 million doses of COVID-19 vaccines were administered. 599,029 were first dose. That means that an equivalent amount is to be administered. It says Pfizer or AstraZeneca, which are the only two-dose vaccines that are being offered. What is the inventory level we have of the two-dose vaccines? The two I just mentioned, that we have in inventory, and what is the expiration, what is the remaining life of those that we have in inventory now? That's question 1. Question 2, what is the government's policy regarding the Ministry of Health / government policy and vaccine mixing? And of course, that would primarily relate to the two-dose vaccines that we have. And third question, Minister. We heard recently that you had, I think, 200,000 doses of vaccine from China. Have you started administering those? That's part 1 of that question. Part 2 of that question, what is the shelf life of those vaccines from China that we have? And if you have not started to administer those, when do you contemplate offering those to the population?
Madam Speaker, let me just say that the dumping of vaccines are indeed unfortunate, particularly in these times when we need take-up. But it's not unusual. In fact, Jamaica is well within the global benchmark standards, where vaccines, anywhere between 10 and 30% of vaccines that are acquired and stockpiled for usage, whether it's a flu vaccine or otherwise, is discarded after, because the expiration date would have, and that's because you store inventory and stock just in case the demand is there. So while I agree with you, I'm just saying we are not exceptional in that regard. Having said that, we do need to encourage more take-up. It is critical, it is essential. And the truth is, the government has done a lot. I mean, both of us in this house, I mean, on your side too. I know we are hard on ourselves, and I think it is necessary. It keeps us on our toes, and we must push harder and try to achieve more. But, I say with all sincerity that the last 18 months of the COVID response, involving thousands of persons, including us here on both sides, I don't think there's a Jamaican who isn't aware of the dangers of COVID, aware that the vaccines offer the best chance, aware that we have vaccines available, and aware of a site somewhere in Jamaica where they can access that vaccine. And sometimes we claim failure, which is demotivating and unfortunate, but the truth is the team has done a very good job so far in trying to push the vaccine take-up program. Now, we have to continue the thrust, and we will. And we are improving as we go along by offering more options. But, member, I don't have the specifics of how many vaccines we have in stock. I do agree with you that come the end of this month, you will have another set of AstraZeneca that will expire. And as you go along every few weeks, you're going to get to some expiration date if you don't use up what you have. The government will be responsible about this by firstly discarding vaccines that are expired. We're not going to administer vaccines that have expired. We're not going to compromise the program and the immunization process. It is better to accept and admit and announce the dumping than to keep it and administer it and undermine the credibility of the vaccination program. Secondly, we will continue to acquire and to hold and to try to convince and make available. And so it is an expenditure, it is a loss, but let it not be said that someone who wants the vaccine cannot get it. And that's, to my mind, a responsible approach on the part of the government. But we have AstraZeneca in stock, despite the amounts that we will have to get rid of the end of this month. Tomorrow it is, a day or so away. We have J&J in stock, more than enough, and we have Pfizer with more to come. I can give you the specific numbers, but suffice to say, there is no risk of running out of any of those if there is a demand for it at this point in time. The mixing of vaccines, member, is not currently recommended by the clinicians here. There are a few countries that have done so, but again, I take advice, and I am told at this point it is not something that we recommend. And we don't need to, because we have the critical brands that can allow for take-up. And finally, the Chinese vaccine. I need to check to see what the status is of that. We did receive 200,000 doses of the Sinopharm, 100 as gift, 100 paid for. Again, an attempt to add to the menu of vaccine options. And I need to check exactly where that is at this point in time. Thank you, Madam
Speaker. You know, Minister, I heard much you said about not administering expired vaccine. No one suggests nor is inviting for that to happen. So that's not a case to be made about not offering it, because that's not on. And I've never heard anybody suggested indirectly or directly that that be the case. So let us not belabor that. But your comments about the level of vaccination and how much has been done bothers me. And I tell you why. While we, and you said it, both sides of the House have made an effort over the past many months to encourage persons to get vaccinated. But when you have a situation where it's only 18.6% of the population is fully vaccinated, you had a target date of March next year for 65%, which is the herd immunity level. And we are just 4 months away from that target, and we are 18.6% of total vaccinated. We are in trouble, serious trouble. What bothers me in your remarks is that we have done so much, and we praise ourselves how good we have done. While we have made all that effort on both sides, we are in serious trouble, and it's nothing to clap ourselves about. What I want us to do on both sides, what else can be done, because something must be done, because we are in a crisis. That is what I want the engagement to be about. But don't get into patting ourselves on the back about how well we have done when we are this far behind. Because the danger of that, Minister, is that it gives a sense of comfort. We have done well. That's what bothers me. We, all of us, not just the government on your side, all of us, the country, is at serious risk when we are at this level. So what I would want to hear more of, how deeper are we digging to get more of our people vaccinated, to overcome the hesitancy and to overcome the anti-vax disposition that prevails in the country? Because the more we have these numbers, it stifles many things that you have spoken about in the country. The economic resurging, etc., and life for ordinary people. That is what I would like to have a bit more energy put in, but not about administering expired drugs.
So, Madam Speaker, quickly, I appreciate the members' collective responsibility and would be more than willing to engage him on some of the suggestions that he has, and would appreciate that, because the truth is we all have a role to play, as you have correctly pointed out. Beyond that, though, however, I think it's also important to recognize, and it wasn't about me. I was representing the thousands of Jamaicans who have really played a part to get that message out and to get the vaccines out and get them in sites. We will have to continue those efforts. We will have to take the vaccines, as we have said before, to communities. We have to be targeted. I have been out in communities vaccinating persons at 8 p.m. at night, in the streets, literally. I carried the cooler, yes, in one instance, you're right, with the public health nurse, to try and reach those persons. But we have a number of programs. We have programs to reach the indigent and those who are not mobile. The parish health does do home visits. We have mobile units, and we're adding more. We're adding another 6 units to the ones that we have. They should be rolling off the line in another few weeks to go into communities. We're working with the private sector through their outreach in private sector entities. The private doctors have been given an opportunity to take up and to offer and to influence their patients. We have private contractors, pharmacies, and others. And we continue to inform, to educate, and to try to persuade. Now, while I fully agree that those efforts cannot ease, and we will continue to explore and evolve where necessary, and that will be an ongoing effort, I also think that there is a case to be made, and member, in light of your collective responsibility that you have admitted and accepted, for personal responsibility in the wider population. And I think we need to make that case, because we shouldn't pretend that the vaccine isn't available, that it is the best form of defense, that people must recognize that they have an interest and should have an interest and should move to taking up the vaccine. And if there are obstacles to that, I would be the first to say, let me know and let us overcome those obstacles. Because I don't want anyone to identify an obstacle that would prevent them from getting any of the vaccines that are available. Thank you, member.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. I really just have one question that I wanted to ask, and one suggestion that I wanted to make to the Minister. One is around those individuals where we did the blitz and so on for their first doses, and how we ensure that there are second doses available and accessible as well. I think that in some cases, and I've had to intervene in some cases, persons have called me, not just from Southwest St. Andrew, but from other areas, about getting that second dose. And I'm not sure if there is a targeted program. Yes, I'm not sure if there's a targeted program to ensure that those who got their first dose, in particular for those where we came into the communities, that a similar effort is made somewhere close around that date. So I wanted to say that. The second one, Minister, is I had alluded to that, and is a similar question that was asked by the member from South St. Catherine. We have done a lot, and I don't think anyone is saying that we have not. But in as much as we have not reached the percentage of the population that we need to, I think sometimes we have to step back and to look at what else can be done. And I am on the ground, so yes, I can think through some of the things that that could help. But that's not my forte. I'm not in marketing. Yeah, that's not my forte. So I don't want, because I've raised it and I want to come and tell you what to do. Yes, I don't have a degree in marketing, and that's not the field in which I work. So I want to make that very, very clear. Also, I do not have access to the resources for the research to identify what are some of the real common issues that are preventing people from coming on board. So as to design a program. I refuse to believe that a country that had a campaign about two being better than too many, a successful campaign, that had a campaign about HIV and AIDS for our sex workers, to the point where today they are probably the population with the lowest prevalence, that we cannot find a way to deal with what we are faced with today. I refuse to believe that. And so that is a challenge that I give there. I want to say one last thing. I think it was New Zealand, very early in the day. They were probably one of the few countries that actually had a campaign led by the government to deal with the disinformation and misinformation campaign, right, that we have seen across the world. We, like many, many, many other countries, did not. Yeah? And I believe that what we also have to look at, and I'm not hearing us talk about it, Minister, it's something you need to look at, something that the Minister of Education also needs to look at, because too many of our people don't recognize credible sources of information. Too many of our people believe that once it's a video and it is on the net, it means it's true. And it goes to an issue that we have to deal with. Because today we're talking about COVID-19 and coronavirus, but tomorrow we'll be talking about something else. And so I want to also put that as something that the government needs to look at. Thank you.
So, Madam Speaker, thank you to the member. There's no doubt that we have to be concerned about the low numbers, and I never intended, and if that was the interpretation, I regret that somehow we were celebrating without recognizing the challenges. We've tried to be as balanced as we can, and we know there's a lot to be done. In terms of the blitz, if we are willing, because we have fixed sites and we have variable sites, and the team is always willing to go into an area, your area, any other area, for a return visit if necessary, despite the presence of those fixed sites that we have put in all health districts, to take up persons who may be having difficulties. So I urge yourself, other members, to reach out and do that. We're working with the churches, we're working with civil society. We are in a number of communities across the length and breadth of Jamaica and offering the vaccines. And again, feel free to get in touch, and that applies to all here and others who may be listening. The step back and the reflection is an ongoing process. Believe me when I tell you, this is a burden that we have had to bear, certainly at the level of the government of Jamaica, the cabinet, who spends hours on this issue, the Ministry of Health, and indeed all the other stakeholders. How do we pivot? How do we adjust? I take the point about other campaigns that have been well done. This is not, the issue of take-up is not just a marketing function, by the way. I mean, I could say that there was a time that we had a target around marketing budgets, and we were condemned for that, and we did pull back. We did pull back in anticipation of right. No, I will, and I'll defend it. I will, and I'll defend it, because the truth is, no, let me just seriously though, and Madam Speaker, I know time is running. The truth is that you live in an era now when the distractions, the noise as they call it, is significant. It's not the time when we only listen to 2 radio stations and 1 television station. Alternative media is alive and well, and indeed the trendsetter. And as one minister in another jurisdiction in the Caribbean said, everybody now all of a sudden has a PhD in Twitter and Instagram and in Facebook. They just pull things down, don't question the sources, and it becomes rules. So we have to work a lot harder, and we do make the effort to make adjustment, and that is an ongoing process. But remember, if you have a suggestion, willing to take it on board, and we will continue to try harder. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you, Minister Tufton. Madam Speaker, the final ministerial statement will be made by the Minister of Housing, Urban Renewal, Environment and Climate Change. He will make two statements, one on housing and one on climate change. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Madam Speaker, I'll start with the statement relating to climate change. Recently, Madam Speaker, Madam Speaker, thank you. Recently, we participated in the United Nations 26th Conference of the Parties, COP26, which took place in Glasgow and was attended by over 196 signatory countries to the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change, UNFCCC. COP26, Madam Speaker, was the largest summit the UK has ever hosted, with over 30,000 delegates, including world leaders, science and policy experts, campaigners, lobbyists, and government officials, with the main objective of agreeing on measures that must be implemented to keep global temperature increases to below 1.5 degrees Celsius. Madam Speaker, the latest climate science is already pointing at a likely increase beyond 2 degrees Celsius if countries fail to meet their climate targets, which involves the implementation of all necessary measures to reduce carbon emissions and increase work towards resilience building. Madam Speaker, Jamaica can be proud, and we have positioned ourselves as climate leaders, having led critical topics such as climate financing, carbon trading at the Climate Summit in 2019, and many other multiple UN engagements, including leading complex climate negotiations in relation to loss and damage associated with climate change, which will be a matter of increased interest. At a national level, we have ensured that we meet our commitments to the Convention, having enhanced our national determined contributions or climate targets in 2020, and our NDC foresees by 2030 emission reductions in forestry and energy sectors of between 25.4% and 28.5% with international support. Madam Speaker, colleagues, Jamaica presented a very strong contingent to COP26, headed by our Prime Minister, the Most Honourable Andrew Holness, with our Minister of Foreign Affairs and Foreign Trade, Senator the Honourable Kamina Johnson-Smith, Minister of Finance and Public Service, the Honourable Nigel Clark, Dr. Clark, and supported by academia, public and private sector, as well as civil society and youth representatives from Jamaica. Other officials who participated included our Tourism Minister, as well as the Attorney General and our Mayor, Delroy Williams, who participated virtually and featured on critical panels at COP26. The conference also adhered to the strictest COVID-19 protocols, with pre-travel testing, vaccination proof requirements, and daily testing. Additionally, many of the most important events, Madam Speaker, including the climate negotiations, were held in closed doors, observing social distancing, proving that we can move on beyond COVID-19. Madam Speaker, the Ministry of Housing, Urban Renewal, Environment and Climate Change is one of the most critical portfolios within the government. Climate change is an issue of high urgency, but substantial complexity. Understanding and acting on this complexity as its impacts are felt on many different layers affecting people, nature, and the economy is a challenge that requires resources, mandate, and continued political support. Madam Speaker, in my capacity as Minister, Jamaica's participation at COP26 has provided me with a renewed perspective on the challenges at hand, and more specifically, the critical role of the climate change divisions in facilitating the government's approach into guiding policies, programs, and projects that can mobilize urgent technical and financial resources to ensure that we adapt and survive the climate crisis for generations to come. Madam Speaker, in participating in such a large conference, countries need to be purposeful and strategic in our planning for the future. Each side event, panel, meeting, and seminar attended must serve our country's priorities to promote capacity, establish partnerships, and mobilize financing. We therefore participated in at least 8 strategic bilateral meetings and more than 25 side events, which covered topics from climate finance, technical assistance for carbon reduction plans, access to microfinancing and investment capital, technology, private sector participation, energy access and financing, resilient infrastructure, among others. These meetings provided me with the opportunity to sit down face-to-face with organizations to discuss how we are going to work together for the benefit of the Jamaican people. It's also served, Madam Speaker, to strengthen our relationship with other governments, such as the UK and India, as well as new organizations that are seeking to collaborate with Jamaica. Madam Speaker, the team went to Glasgow with 2 top priorities: support our climate ambition, which speaks to our targets, strategies, policies, and plans, and increase our access to climate finance. I will aim to summarize the most important outcomes in the short and medium term. For climate ambition, in October, we launched our NDC implementation plan, which identifies 16 commitments for carbon reductions and adaptation measures under the 2 focus sectors of our national climate plan: energy and forestry. It is now our part of the bargain for us to clearly articulate our plans. We must build portfolios of bankable projects for new investments, Madam Speaker, get our institutions ready for project implementation, and make sure that climate finance reaches our most vulnerable communities. During my time at COP26, serving also as co-chair to the global initiative, the NDC partnership, I prioritized bilateral meetings with key international partners such as the International Renewable Energy Agency, IRENA, the NDC partnership, the 2050 Pathways, the Commonwealth Secretariat, the UN Capital Development Fund, as well as governments of the US, India, and the UK, to name a few. We discussed how to integrate these goals and how my ministry will work together with the ministries with responsibility for energy, agriculture, local government, and other sectors to bring as much support programs and expertise to align their portfolios with our national climate targets. Similarly, we have secured support from the UK government through its Department for Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy to support technical advisory services directly at MSET, focused on policy review and development in alignment with the Paris Agreement. Together with my NDC co-chair, Minister Alok Sharma from the UK, we also launched the Partnership Action Fund with an initial capitalization of $33 million US from international partners. Through this Partnership Action Fund, the NDC partnership members, including Jamaica, will obtain the necessary technical expertise and capacities will be funded to address the gaps in developing country members' NDC needs. This is extremely timely, Madam Speaker, for Jamaica, as we recently, as I said, launched our NDC implementation plan before we departed to COP, and therefore we will begin to immediately benefit from the resources for the implementation of our climate targets. Madam Speaker, on climate finance. Access to climate finance remains an issue for small countries like Jamaica. First, because the international financial system is complex and has extensive requirements. And secondly, because there are many countries competing to access the same funding sources to achieve sometimes similar or different yet important outcomes. One thing that was certain was that going into COP26, our main priority was to promote our capacity as a country to implement programs and projects that can generate impact, the availability of local expertise and institutions to drive the conceptualization of solutions, and our capacity to be a reliable and trusted country partner for any available funding source, the only way for us to be able to attract that grant funding. On that note, Jamaica was announced as one of 5 pioneer countries selected by the Task Force on Access to Climate Finance to pilot new approaches to access at the national and local levels for financing and support of that financing, delivery of the financing, and implementation of new initiatives, plans, and projects. Madam Speaker, we will be working with the Ministry of Finance and the Task Force on details for the operationalization of this opportunity. The selection of Jamaica by the Task Force will facilitate, among other things, the breaking down of those barriers that we have had in getting that money to be put to work in solutions to the most challenging climate and environmental related issues that increase our vulnerability and exacerbate our economic issues. Additionally, we held bilateral meetings, Madam Speaker, with the Climate Investment Fund, critical in order to scale up the results from the successful 10-year partnership with Jamaica under the pilot program for climate resilience. Many communities in White River, Upper Rio Minnow, Clarendon, Rocky Point, and other communities across Jamaica have benefited, this is before, have benefited from projects under this program that promote aquaponics, watershed management, resilient crop production and storage, water efficiency, weather and climate technology, etc. We have benefited from those over the last 10 years in those communities. And I will be working with the Planning Institute of Jamaica to promote the results of these and many other activities, Madam Speaker, and to discuss opportunities for us as a nation to tap into the CIF's new nature program so that we can access concessional resources at scale to improve livelihoods and address mitigation and adaptation to climate change through the sustainable use of land, forest protection, and other natural resources at the landscape. Madam Speaker, the largest international fund dedicated to fighting climate change and which we must strategically continue pursuing is the Green Climate Fund, the GCF. To date, Jamaica has received over $2 million in grant funding for readiness activities.
Minister's time for speaking has expired.
Madam Speaker, I ask that the Minister be allowed sufficient time to complete his presentation.
The question before the House is that the Minister be given sufficient time to complete his presentation. Those in favour? Those against? The ayes have it. Minister.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Today, Jamaica has received over $2 million in grant funding for readiness activities, and this funding has been dedicated to strengthening our national agencies to tackle the challenges brought by climate change across sectors and to develop and implement projects that bring tangible results to our communities. However, climate finance management at a national level requires a new approach that is more strategic, programmatic, agile, streamlined as well across government and constantly monitored for impact and results. I will therefore work in conceptualizing and establishing, Madam Speaker, Jamaica's Climate Finance Access Unit within my ministry with the aim to support our national efforts in collaboration with the Ministry of Finance, PIOJ, and other key stakeholders. It is also noteworthy, Madam Speaker, that the Adaptation Fund, of which Jamaica is a current beneficiary, had its largest contribution to date at COP26. This really bodes well for us in terms of accessing additional resources in the future, especially since the previous cap of $10 million US was lifted this year. Madam Speaker, outcomes of the COP26 also will provide countries like Jamaica with access not just to financial but to technical assistance specifically for loss and damage action. And this will come under the initiative that for the first time was recognized and operationalized at a climate conference called the Santiago Network. Madam Speaker, additionally to these bilateral meetings, Jamaica joined key commitments that will propel further climate action, such as the Glasgow Leaders' Declaration on Forest and Land Use. We also joined with approximately 120 world leaders in the promise to tackle deforestation by 2030. And there have been similar initiatives before, but this one is better funded as it has been backed by $18 million US in funding by the UK. Our own efforts here in Jamaica to plant 3 million trees in 3 years are bearing fruit and will benefit from this initiative. And we're looking into ways, Madam Speaker, to leverage this financing that will be made available through this declaration to advance and progress the actions of the Forestry Department and many, many other national organizations to conserve forests, accelerate restoration efforts, to enhance rural livelihoods, including empowering communities to develop profitable, sustainable agriculture, to redesign and develop policies, as well as programs to benefit the environment while creating sustainable economic growth. Lastly, Madam Speaker, forging solid partnerships was at the core of our participation at COP26. Jamaica joined the launch of the Infrastructure for Resilient Island States, IRIS, which is a dedicated initiative that was co-created by the Coalition for Disaster Resilient Infrastructure. It aims to support small island developing states in achieving sustainable development through a systematic approach to resilient, sustainable, and inclusive infrastructure. The initiative will provide technical support on the multifaceted issues posed by infrastructure systems and also promote disaster and climate resilience of infrastructure assets in small island developing states. It will also help in the sharing of the latest knowledge and learnings targeted to specific infrastructure sectors. And Madam Speaker, Jamaica will quickly move to identify technical collaborations to strengthen infrastructure systems for resilient development in our country. In closing, climate action in Jamaica requires a massive transformation of our economic architecture and activities. The fact is, we need more resource-efficient industrial production and improved consumption patterns and behaviors. We need modern and efficient modes of transportation and mechanisms to produce cleaner and more sustainable electricity. We are working, Madam Speaker, to improve the management of our natural resources, including recovering our forest cover and also incorporating climate-resilient infrastructure, all while continuing our pathway towards sustained growth. The reality is we will need urgent transformation and innovation in all sectors. The scale of these changes will require significant financial investment, policy change where necessary, and international cooperation. And we need, Madam Speaker, to encourage both the public and private sectors to remain focused on ensuring that Jamaica becomes a climate-smart island. As we step into the last month of the year, we must all consider the Jamaica we envision for the near future. For me, Madam Speaker, the answer is clear. Jamaica will be climate resilient. We will be sustainable, and we will prosper. We owe it to the generations to come. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Minister.
Madam Speaker, sorry.
If I could just ask you one question on that presentation, for which I thank you. clearly, COP26 produced quite an array of initiatives. What I would ask of you is, in terms of going forward in 2022, what would be the main things that you would like to see Jamaica achieve in relation to climate resilience or the whole issue of climate change over the next 12 months? Coming out of COP, what are the priorities for you as Minister of Environment and Climate Change over the next 12-month period? Just with, carrying forward whatever momentum there was coming out of the COP summit.
Thank you. Thank you. The priorities as laid out will have to align with also the commitments that we have made. And I would want to see Jamaica continuing in its effort to be one of the countries that achieve the commitments that we have set out, that move beyond that in terms of also being participants in programs that are going to help not just Jamaica, but other small island developing states or big ocean states. So in terms of the access to financing program that we are involved in, we would want to see the framework set and for that to be advanced. We also have the local facility program, which is going to streamline climate resilience in our municipal corporations. We're focused on getting the work done to prepare for that to be absorbed in our agencies. And we launched the NDC implementation plan before we left COP to go to COP. And now we are seeking mechanisms to be able to strengthen partnerships to get the support to actualize our implementation plan. So I think those would be the primary areas of focus for us, in addition to what we continue to do in terms of the PPCR programs and the programs that connect directly to the communities, coastal communities, rural communities, in terms of raising awareness. We have an initiative which will be Renew Jamaica, which is also going to help as a behavior change program to strengthen partnerships, across private and public sector, with a view to enhancing the understanding around climate action and being able to tap into the resources for us to find innovative ways to advance solutions. Grace Kennedy Foundation, for instance, will soon, be communicating to the country a wonderful piece of innovation that's going to help to clean up our marine space. And we hope to encourage more of that mechanism across the country, where small communities, large communities can find innovative techniques that will help to advance the environmental agenda as well as climate action. Madam Speaker, that said, I'll move quickly to the statement on building resilience through housing rehabilitation. Madam Speaker, as the Minister with responsibility for Ministry of Housing, Urban Renewal, Environment and Climate Change, I rise to update the Parliament on some of the critical aspects of the work being done by the Ministry as we seek to build resilience through housing rehabilitation. Early next year, we will give a more detailed update, but I will briefly touch on two primary policies and laws and then move into the program that we are advancing. The Ministry continues to pursue the development of the National Housing Policy and Implementation Plan, which is the overarching guideline for the housing sector, expected to be tabled in the Parliament as a white paper by the end of this financial year. The Policy and Implementation Plan promotes a wide range of mechanisms to increase access for all income levels. These include fostering partnerships with the private sector and other providers to increase the supply of additional housing solutions to meet projected demand, rationalizing the roles of the public sector agencies directly involved in the provision of housing, identifying mechanisms to make land more accessible to all income groups for housing development, providing a framework to support the delivery of social housing, particularly for the vulnerable and disadvantaged, and establishing mechanisms to reduce the impacts of natural disasters and other emergencies on human settlements. Madam Speaker, extensive consultations have been completed with ministries, departments and agencies and other critical stakeholders. The document is now in its final stages of examination by a technical review committee and will then be submitted to Cabinet for consideration and approval. And one of the critical recommendations of the proposed National Housing Policy is the amendment to the Rent Restriction Act, an amendment that will see us strengthening the outdated provisions and addressing the challenges faced by landlords and tenants. A viable rental industry, Madam Speaker, is essential as an option to access adequate, safe and legal housing solutions for all Jamaicans. Further to extensive consultations and the issuing of drafting instructions to the Chief Parliamentary Council, we are now awaiting the 5th draft bill, which we anticipate being the final draft before Cabinet's consideration and approval. And we are working towards this legislation being tabled in the Houses of Parliament before the end of the financial year. In this regard, Madam Speaker, let me pause to recognise the hard work of the Office of the Chief Parliamentary Council, the Attorney General Chambers, and my own team at the Ministry of Housing, Urban Renewal, Environment and Climate Change, among others, that have and continue to commit themselves to this extended process. And those before us as well, who sat in this chair and gave their sterling contribution. Madam Speaker, on informal settlements, we continue to do our survey of informal settlements across the country, and we have completed 8 parishes so far. Additionally, we are developing the national policy on informal settlements, and the policy is expected to utilize the data obtained from the comprehensive survey to inform policy direction and also to facilitate a more sustainable approach to the use and occupation of lands. Ultimately, through this strategic approach, life and property can be preserved, dignity restored, and a sense of community realized, and Jamaicans, Madam Speaker, can ultimately enjoy an improved quality of life. The Ministry is engaged in a series of stakeholder consultations on the first draft policy, having completed consultations with internal stakeholders and some communities. In short order, consultations will continue with the remaining municipal corporations and other stakeholders, including private landowners and members of the legal fraternity. Madam Speaker, the suite of policies and legislations will aid in providing the enabling framework that is critical for the improvement of the provision of adequate, safe, legal and affordable housing for all Jamaicans. Madam Speaker, climate-related disasters have been the primary drivers of internal displacement during the past decade. Just earlier this month, the downpour in St. James forced many families to leave their houses consequent to the devastating flooding. Undoubtedly, we must prioritize resilience building while we seek to mitigate the inevitable. So, Madam Speaker, we simply cannot tackle the right for housing without speaking about the implications of climate change. As climate change intensifies, housing stability will be increasingly under threat. Housing is the primary determinant of people's financial security and well-being. And while the impacts of climate change are felt in every sphere of our lives, whether directly or indirectly, our housing sector, for obvious reasons, is especially vulnerable. And this vulnerability is pronounced for those persons in low-income spaces and those residing in informal settlements who often live in substandard housing. And this is exacerbated when we build on hillsides, along gully banks and in river courses. Parliament will recall, for example, the significant impact of tropical storms Zeta and Eta in late October 2020. In the Shooters Hill area, 74% of the residents surveyed suffered damages to their house, ranging from major to catastrophic, while in Weiss Road, 31%. Madam Speaker, this is one of the reasons why we have to be advancing relocation, rehabilitation, and where necessary, regularization. Madam Speaker, I am pleased then to announce that the Ministry of Housing, Urban Renewal, Environment and Climate Change will be working with all members of Parliament to identify those households at greatest risk, and will provide an allocation of at least $1 million to each parliamentarian to support the resilience building effort in every constituency across Jamaica. The ministry will collaborate with MPs. We will provide directions and support for the initiative, and I implore my colleagues on both sides to submit the requested information at the soonest and no later than February 2022. It is my hope that we can be able to assist, if even in a small way, before the next season starts. Madam Speaker, the Ministry of Housing, Urban Renewal, Environment and Climate Change is well aware of the awesome responsibility and monumental task that we have to ensure that every Jamaican has access to safe, legal and affordable housing. And we are committed to and will continue to approach this in a very systematic and logical manner to ensure that no one gets left behind as we play our part in renewing Jamaica. Thank you.
Announcement.
Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Somehow I'm not catching, you're not catching my eye. I just see people standing up without catching my eyes. Go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Let me welcome the statement by the Minister. But, Madam Speaker, even though positive, and for as long as I've been in this House, and I'm sure that many, we keep on making statements and policy changes towards the whole issue of housing, but we never yet really operationalize what it is that we promise. And I'm hoping that, coming from the Minister's statement, that we will see some movement in that direction. On the issue of the informal settlement survey that the Minister has mentioned in his statement, a similar statement was made in 2018 by the Prime Minister that the Ministry of Economic Growth and Job Creation would have initiated a survey in looking at our informal settlements around the island. He even went as far as stating that it would have cost about $13 million at the time for that survey. The Minister a few months ago spoke about a similar survey. So I want to know from the Minister, is this the same survey that was started in 2018, or is it a new survey, and what is the cost of the survey, or whatever happened to that original survey that was announced from 2018? The matter of building resilience is something that we on this side is excited about. We are all excited about it. But I'm just hoping, just like what has happened with the HOPE program, where 2 years, those who have received the houses are happy member. But there's, remember, what we have seen is that there is a fragmentation of the sector itself. There are so many different agencies doing similar things, but we always speak about join up government for efficiencies. But we're not seeing that, Minister. And I'm hoping that the land titling, the issue of the different agencies that's providing titling, that there can be some unisys between all agencies, so it is more efficient and cost-effective for each Jamaican who is wanting the service. But I hope that the programs that you're speaking about, especially with the building resilience, doesn't end up, as I said, the HOPE program itself. 2 years ago, each member of parliament was approached. A list of beneficiaries was given. But yet still there are some. Well, Minister, if they were as efficient as your ministry, if they were as efficient as your ministry, I would be up here praising them. But I can tell you, 5 names out of Northwest Manchester, they were all checked, and we only have one house that has, after 2 years, still. And I remember whenever it is that those other beneficiaries see, or potential beneficiaries, then it is the one that the blame doesn't go on the government. It is on us who makes the recommendation. So I'm just saying, overall, it was not the intention, but there's some efficiency in the system. That whenever it is that beneficiaries are to get what they're supposed to get, that it is done in a way that is streamlined properly, Minister, and that it is done in a timely manner. So even though we are supporting the programs, I just want to make those same points, but to ask the question, and if you could answer, about this survey, as one was announced in 2018, you announced one a couple months ago in your own presentation in the House. And I would like to know if the one in 2018 had started, was not completed, or is this a new one that we are spending money on?
Thank you, Member, for your questions. And I also shared the concern as it relates to the timeliness and efficiency of the programs, particularly because of the rapid growth that we're seeing in the informal settlements. So I do understand the concern, and I can advise you that when I came into the ministry and we evaluated the program from 2019, which it is the same program, that concern was pivotal to us moving it forward in an expedited way. But we also were faced with the severity of the pandemic. And the issues that would come with that in terms of restraining movement and capacity to go out into spaces and to do the actual physical survey. But we were able to work within the protocols and advance the process as much as possible, which has led to us speeding it up, and we have 8 parishes now completed. We would need about, I think it's 47 million to complete the rest. I think 52 million was the first budget for the initial survey. But we'll need some money to complete the rest of the survey in relation to the parishes that are not yet done. In terms of the streamlining, again, easily agreed and understood. Matter of fact, we are moving to streamline climate resilience across all sectors and to identify focal points in every ministry for the thinking and operation around building resilience to be something that becomes the second nature. We work well with all agencies that are related to or have any interaction or responsibility for social housing. We work well with the programs under HOPE, HAJ that has the primary responsibility for some of the regularization across our country. We have committees where we ensure that the sharing of knowledge and learning, and where we discuss issues in relation to the activities taking place across ministry. Matter of fact, for an example, the low-income housing initiative that was advanced under the Ministry of Economic Growth and Job Creation, it is the senior director from the Ministry of Housing that chaired that body. And so, in terms of the synergy and streamlining that you have highlighted, it is necessary, and it is the approach that we are taking in terms of tackling and combating the issues that we see, very, very severe issues in terms of the informal settlements.
Madam Speaker, while I welcome the $1 million to each MP, I wanted to ask the Minister exactly what it would be available for. Would it be, for example, to provide support to persons whose housing conditions are dilapidated or in a deteriorating situation, or is it to address something for infrastructure? Because, to be frank, all of us know $1 million can't do nothing. And I would prefer if you speak to your colleague in front of me and see if we can do something meaningful. I mean, the announcement is good, but when I'm thinking of what you can what impact you can have in any, even if I take one of my urban communities, it is less than a drop in the bucket. I know the constraints, but let's try and find something that can have a meaningful impact, even if it means, as I said, speaking to your colleague about something more. But I don't know if you can tell me exactly what the money would be used for, specifically. So,
member, firstly, if you don't want the $1 million to be allocated to you, feel free to send it to our seat Clarendon. We need it. But on a serious note, the $1 million is in no way expected to be something that is going to assist in supporting infrastructure development or community development. What we have done is we have taken a very empirical approach to assessing the calls that we get, the letters that we receive, the support that is requested at the ministry. And what we found is that there is a significant portion of persons across the country who require perhaps not large portions to assist them, but a 50, a 40, 100,000 to assist in building resilience in terms of, for instance, a grandmother who is alone and, rainy season coming, but she needs some assistance with her roof. So we are hoping that this can be a support. We are hoping this can be a support to help in terms of building that resilience. It is not our intention for this to be the only program. We do hope to get some support from the Ministry of Finance that will assist in terms of identifying areas across the community where we will integrate green spaces and be able to do more substantive work. So, member, it is our intention to start here, but to continue in the next financial year with larger programs that will support in more significant ways the resilience building effort in communities. But we have to start somewhere.
Announcements.
Laid on the table of the House today are the following. Ministry paper number 94 of 2021, entitled Cabinet Agenda Issues for September 6 and 13, 2021. Ministry paper number 95 of 2021, entitled Cabinet Agenda Issues for September 20, 2021. And Ministry paper number 96 of 2021, entitled Cabinet Agenda Issues for September 27, 2021. Ministry paper number 97 of 2021 and annual report and audited financial statement of the Agro-Investment Corporation for the year ending March 31, 2018. Ministry paper number 98 of 2021, entitled Ministry paper number 98 of 2021 and annual report of the Statistical Institute of Jamaica for the financial years ending March 31, 2015 and March 31, 2016. The Major Organized Crime and Anti-Corruption Agency investigation and Prosecution Procedures Regulations 2021 under the Major Organization Crime and Anti-Corruption Agency Act, and certified appropriation account for head 15,000 Office of the Prime Minister for the year 2017-2018 and head 15,020 for the Registrar General's Department for the year 2019-2020.
Bills brought from the Senate, petitions, papers, reports from committees, reports, notices of motions given orally. We're at notices of motions given orally.
Thank you. Madam Speaker, I beg to give notice that at the next meeting of the House, I will move Major Organized Crime and Anti-Corruption Agency Act. The Major Organized Crime and Anti-Corruption Investigation and Prosecution Procedures Regulation 2021 Resolution. Whereas by virtue of Section 42 of the Major Organized Crime and Anti-Corruption Act, hereinafter referred to as the Act, the Minister may make regulations subject to affirmative resolution. And whereas on the 30th day of November 2021, the Minister made the Major Organized Crime and Anti-Corruption Investigation and Prosecution Procedures Regulations 2021. And whereas it is desired that the Major Organized Crime and Anti-Corruption Investigation and Prosecution Procedures Regulations 2021 be affirmed, now therefore be it resolved by this Honourable House as follows. 1. This resolution may be cited as the Major Organized Crime and Anti-Corruption Investigation and Prosecution Procedures Regulation 2021 Resolution. 2. The Major Organized Crime and Anti-Corruption Investigation and Prosecution Procedures Regulation 2021 is hereby affirmed. Madam Speaker.
Questions and answers. Beg your pardon? Notices of motions given orally. Yes.
Raising a concern. There is a motion before the House. Item 4 on the order paper that was tabled by the member from Northwest Manchester. The subject of which it has been sitting here since December 8, 2020. I raise it, Madam Speaker, because today, when we meet, it's the first day after a sister country of ours, Barbados, became a republic after 50 years of independence. And this motion by the member sought to have us as a parliament, within the provisions of the Constitution, take the necessary steps to deshackle ourselves from our former colonizer in a meaningful way. For next year, August, when we would be celebrating our 60th year of independence. Against that background, Madam Speaker, it would be useful if the acting leader of government business could advise the House how likely it is that this motion by the member will be dealt with so that we hear. Last night I waited until midnight to watch our sister nation deshackle itself, and I was a bit depressed that while we have had much consultations in this country about that, right, from in the 90s, we now approaching 60 years is still lacking in the courage to do what they have done. I believe it's high time. Let us use this turning point for our sister nation as a catalyst to formally shed ourselves of that vestige of colonialism. So, Madam Speaker, I'll be grateful if the House Leader could assist us.
The House Leader is the acting House Leader this afternoon. I don't know if she can help us, but we have heard your voice and we can communicate to see order.
Madam Speaker, may I? I just would wish to indicate to the member that we consider this motion an important motion, and that the subject and the matter is being actively looked at, and you will get the appropriate response in short order.
But given the longevity of the tabling of the motion, December last year, could you be precise, if not today, but at the next sitting, indicate when it will be done? Because quite often we hear the short order, very shortly, and nothing happens.
Member, I just have to indicate to you that you will get a response soonest. That's as much as I can say at this time. But we consider the matter important. And Parliament will be looking at this motion or the subject itself at the earliest possible time. That's as much as I can say today. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
All right. Questions and answers to questions?
Madam Speaker.
No, you didn't catch my eye in time. You know, it's 6:32. We're at...
No, I don't know where your eye was, Madam Speaker.
My eye was right here on the paper and on the gentleman who was speaking.
No, I had my mic on, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker? No.
If I don't see you, if I see you, I will make I didn't see your hand.
Madam Speaker, since the time has passed for question and answers to be taken, I ask that the House consider now taking question and answers at this time, because the time has passed, so we will now have to get the approval of the House to do so. Madam Speaker.
Members, it's now 6:33, almost 6:34. I know the time has moved on, the time has passed for questions and answers. So the question before the House is that we be allowed as a House to deal with the item, questions and answers to questions. Those in favor? Those against? The ayes have it. Questions and answers to questions.
Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I beg to give notice that at the expiration of 21 days, I will ask the Minister of Education, Youth and Information the following question.
I beg to give notice that at the expiration of 21 days, I will ask the Minister of Housing, Urban Renewal, Environment and Climate Change the following question.
Motions that may be made at the commencement of public business requiring notice, motions relating to sittings of the House, motions for leave to introduce bills, presentation of bills without leave of the House first obtained, public business.
Madam Speaker, I now ask that the Senate amendments to a bill entitled An Act to amend the International Corporate and Trust Services Providers Act to regulate domestic trusts service providers and domestic corporate service providers, to change the name of the Act to reflect the foregoing, to incorporate provisions which serve to deter the use of business operations under the Act for the purposes of money laundering, the financing of terrorism, and the proliferation of weapons of mass destruction, to require service providers to observe customer due diligence requirements, maintain accurate records and systems of internal controls, and to provide for connected matters be approved. Madam Speaker, the Senate just made the amendment to which I speak is only one amendment, and it's with regard to clause 4 of the bill in the definition of beneficial, open quotes, beneficial owner, close quotes, at paragraph B, subparagraph Roman numeral 1 and Roman numeral 2, the words any individual was changed to an individual in order for us to achieve consistency with subsection common letter A, Roman numeral 2. Madam Speaker, the passage of this amendment here is, as I mentioned, when the bill first came to the House, is critical to Jamaica fulfilling. It's one of the matters that Jamaica committed to fulfilling under our process with FATF. The process that we colloquially describe as grey listing is just a process that's called enhanced monitoring, and you agree on a set of reforms that you're going to operate, not only pass, but operationalize. And this is one of the critical ones, Madam Speaker. And passage here in the bill would move us one step further to satisfying the SATF requirements and honoring the commitments that Jamaica made to the FATF international body. I can't say how pleased I am that we're at this stage of passage, and this one amendment, I hope, won't hold us up any further. And I invite the House to approve this amendment.
Madam Speaker, no objection to the amendment proposed by the Senate. And I know the Minister's preoccupation with this particular bill is to try and do what is necessary to get Jamaica off of that grey list for money laundering and terrorism financing. And there are a number of aspects to doing that, this being one, as I understand it. I'm also concerned about the actual business and industry that the original legislation that this is amending was seeking to promote of Jamaica as an international financial center. So much time and money, but even I think time more than money, of the capacity of government in terms of the Chief Parliamentary Council's drafting capacity and the relevant ministries' technical support to that process has been invested over a decade in trying to get this international financial services center concept off the ground. The authority was established years ago, but we really haven't felt any impact from it whatsoever so far. This legislation kind of tightens it up more, so it's really not so much about promoting that business as trying to get Jamaica to have the necessary AML, CFD infrastructure around this aspect of that industry. But one piece which is missing and which is critical is the international companies legislation. Minister, this was brought here, I think, when Minister Vaz had responsibility for commerce, that ministry. I had provided detailed comments on that bill, which I then had a process of interaction with the technical team in the authority about. And that's months ago now. And the bill hasn't been brought back. And I don't think that we can make any real progress with this international financial services concept that we've been spending so much time and money on unless we have the company's piece intact. And it is now, my recollection of it is a LLC legislation that was decided on, and that was what was brought. And, you know, it has its benefits because it's a cohesive single approach, whereas what had been done before was very eclectic with bits of legislation for lots of different jurisdictions, which I think was probably not as appropriate as having something that comes from a single source, which is what I understand this to be. But I spoke to Minister Shaw about it twice, and he promised me he would speak to you about it. I don't know which part of government this now lies, but we really need to get that show on the road because it's absolutely, the LLC one, it's absolutely critical for that whole project to get off the ground, if it can,
Madam Speaker, thank you to the member for raising that. The truth is, the international financial services idea came sort of late in the day. And I tell you a funny story, which is factual story. Jamaica was never on the radar of these international bodies because we didn't have an international financial services center. And I'll tell it in a short form. It was back in, whatever it was, 2007, 2008, where there's this conference, I think, in Mexico, where they had all of the financial services people there, and the international bodies were like saying, look, this is going to be a problem, it's an issue. And someone would say, wait, how come you don't have Jamaica? They just announced a financial services center. And it was then that our engagement with them started. So just even saying you're going to have an international financial services center brought us attention that we otherwise wouldn't have had. Now, the way in which the world has moved, the idea, the business model of the International Financial Services Center is pretty much shot, unless you can. Only those who can deliver really higher value-added services are going to be able to survive. So that traditional model, what we would have probably thought about tax-based financial services, is probably not as viable as it once was. However, there are other things that are potentially viable, doing, what do you call it, accounting work and high-level accounting work, high-level services work. That being said, legal deal journal, yes, that big transaction, that's definitely a possibility for a late starter like Jamaica in that field. With respect to the LLC bill that you mentioned, first of all, I definitely agree with what has happened and what is happening. We definitely need legislation where companies can migrate and so on. We desperately need that, or else it's... So that, no, the LLC bill came before this House, and because of the same FATF requirements, we had to, and it's coming from the Ministry of Economic Growth and Job Creation, not the ministry, right? Right. So you remember that one of our FATF obligations or agreements is to amend the Companies Act with respect to the disclosure of beneficial ownership. Today, we have an obligation. The law says in 2017 the amendment changed to say if you have 50% or more, you have to disclose who those owners are. FATF's view, which is that that's not consistent with international standards, we need to reduce it to 20% so that competent authorities can have access to whoever owns 20% or more, whoever the ultimate beneficial owner up the chain for 20% or more of a Jamaican limited liability company. Those amendments are working their way through, and Minister Shaw has charge of those, and they need to come to the House as soon as possible. Now, with that being the substance requirement, when the LLC bill came, it didn't have this FATF lens on it before. Took a look at it and realized that it was lacking in that sort of beneficial ownership disclosure and so forth. And if we passed it as is, it would really speak to Jamaica not in substance understanding where we are in this game of FATF, right? In that we're closing one hole and then opening another. So a long way to say that the bill is under review by the unit in the BOJ that is the counterpart of FATF in Jamaica, to just make sure that when we eventually pass it and introduce this new legal form, we don't inadvertently introduce a legal person and arrangement that is that can be abused to hide ownership and so forth. So those are the amendments being made to it, and it ought to be. It ought to be. It ought to be. So I believe it should be coming back shortly. It's competing for resources like everything else. But that is the reason why it didn't go through at the time. We had to draw it up because of the FATF requirements. Yeah.
Madam Speaker, I ask for the recommittal of items.
Before, can I invite the minister to...
Madam Speaker, I ask for a recommittal of motions, notice of motion. No.
I'm asking you to speak to the amendment.
Yes, Madam Speaker, thank you. Thank you. I'm asking that the amendment be approved.
Members, the question before the House is that the Senate amendment to the bill be approved. Those in favor? Those against? The ayes have it.
Madam Speaker, I ask for the recommittal of items, announcements, and notices of motions given orally.
The question before the House is that the item announcements and notices of motions given orally be recommitted at this time. Those in favor? Those against? The ayes have it. Announcements.
Also laid on the table of the House today are copies of the Public Bodies Management and Accountability Nomination, Selection and Appointment to Boards Regulations 2021 under the Public Bodies Management and Accountability Act and the resolution.
Notices of motions given orally.
Madam Speaker, I beg to give notice that at the next meeting of the House, I will move the Public Bodies Management and Accountability Act, the Public Bodies Management and Accountability Nomination, Selection and Appointment to Boards Regulations 2021 Resolution. Whereas by virtue of Section 24, subsection 1, subsection C of the Public Bodies Management and Accountability Act, hereinafter referred to as the Act, the Minister may make regulations generally for giving effect to the provisions and purposes of the Act and may in particular specify criteria for the appointment of boards of public bodies. And whereas on the 30th day of November 2021, the Minister made the Public Bodies Management and Accountability Nomination, Selection and Appointment to Board Regulations 2021, and whereas it is provided by Section 24, subsection 2 of the Act, that regulations made under Section 24, subsection 1 of the Act shall be subject to affirmative resolution. Now, therefore, be it resolved by this Honourable House as follows. This resolution may be cited as the Public Bodies Management and Accountability Nomination, Selection and Appointment to Boards Regulations 2021 Resolution. And 2, the Public Bodies Management and Accountability Nomination, Selection and Appointment to Boards Regulation 2021 are hereby affirmed. Madam Speaker, I intend to take this next week to its completion. But on the retabling on these regulations, I just want to say, permit me to say just a few words. A few. So, Madam Speaker, we are retabling these.
Are you actually starting the debate or are you not?
No, I'm not starting the debate. But given how many times this has been here, it is necessary for me to aid the passage quickly next week. I just have to say a few words on it. It will be no less than 4 minutes. So, hold me to that. No more. Well, I need an extra 30 seconds for all the laughter, right?
No more laughter because it's 4 minutes is going. Go right ahead.
So, Madam Speaker, these regulations have been to this House. This is about the 4th or 5th time. They first came in November of 2019, and they were withdrawn and amended. They came back in December of 2019. They were passed in this House. Then they went to the Senate, and They stayed in the Senate for some time. I reintroduced in July with some amendments, and was taken to the House, and there was no quorum when it came for passage. And we came back 2 weeks later, and there was no quorum. But on the two occasions, it was the opposition who pointed out no quorum. Let that be clear. But there was no quorum. So that is 1, 2, 3, 4. So this is the 5th time, Madam Speaker. And I, Madam Speaker, plead with my colleagues on both sides of the aisle that we pass it in this House, and I plead with my colleagues in the Senate that we also do so. Just in case anybody is wondering what they contain, this is essentially the same set of regulations that were passed in December 2019, with the exception that we introduced the gender component, and obviously updated the date to 2021, and we made minor change to make it clear that the financial secretary is responsible for the database and that the financial secretary is responsible for the fit and proper. Other than that, they remain the same. So the amendment that was introduced in July of 2021, to which Member Daly strenuously objected about a differential in how senators are treated versus councillors, that has been removed, and the original position that was in the bill tabled in December 2019, which this House passed, and when you before you were elevated, I acknowledge that we had worked on this together. So same bill that was passed in 2019, with those changes, the bill that is before us again, same regulations. So I ask that we consider it next week for passage. Thank you. And this fulfills the commitment of the government publicly to do so, right? Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. That was sort of a preview, right, of your presentation next week. Madam Speaker, it's not contemplated to do any further business at this time, so I ask for the adjournment of the House to Tuesday, December 7 at 2 p.m. Thank you.
The question before the House is that we do adjourn until next Tuesday, the 7th of December. Those in favor? Those against? The ayes have it. This House is now adjourned.